My sister gifted me a DNA test for my 34th birthday, laughing and announcing to a table of elite socialites that maybe this would finally explain why I was another man's mistake of the family. Months later, when our family estate lawyer called them for an urgent meeting regarding my very existence, their faces went completely pale. My name is Brooke, and I am 34 years old. For most of my life, I have been trying to heal from the quiet, insidious wounds my family inflicted on me. I work as a financial compliance auditor. I spend my days looking for irregularities, tracing hidden funds, and ensuring that ledgers balance perfectly. My career was my escape from their toxicity, a world governed by hard facts and undeniable numbers, unlike the shifting sands of my family's conditional love. Yet, despite building my own independent life, I still maintained contact with them, hoping that one day I would finally earn a seat at their table. That fragile hope was permanently shattered on a rainy Thursday night in downtown Chicago. It was my birthday, and my family had insisted on taking me out to dinner. We were seated in the private dining room of a high-end steakhouse, a place where the chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over crisp white tablecloths and crystal wine glasses. The air smelled of expensive roasted garlic, aged beef, and the heavy perfume my mother always wore. It should have been a celebration of my life, but as usual, the evening had been entirely hijacked by my younger sister, Chelsea. Chelsea was 31 years old and lived the kind of life that only generational wealth could buy. She was a lifestyle influencer, spending her days posting photos of designer handbags and luxury vacations funded entirely by our parents. While I had spent my 20s studying late into the night to pass my certification exams, Chelsea had been handed the world on a silver platter. She was the golden child, effortless, loud, and constantly demanding the spotlight. I sat quietly near the end of the long mahogany table wearing a simple tailored blazer that I had bought myself. Across from me sat the man I had called my father for my entire life. Gregory was the powerful CEO of a massive commercial real estate firm. He was a man who commanded rooms and intimidated rivals, but when it came to his daughters, he clearly played favorites. Beside him sat my mother, Linda, who spent the entire evening nodding along to Chelsea's endless stories about her latest brand deals and upcoming trips to Milan. We were surrounded by about a dozen extended family friends, affluent couples, who nodded and laughed at everything Chelsea said. No one had asked me how my job was going. No one had asked me about my life. I was just the audience for the Chelsea show. As the waiters cleared our plates and began bringing out the dessert menus, Chelsea suddenly stood up. She tapped her manicured fingernail against her champagne flute, the sharp ringing sound bringing the entire room to a halt. "I have a surprise," Chelsea announced, her voice overly bright and theatrical. She reached under the table and pulled out a small, brightly wrapped box with a silver bow. She walked around the table and placed it directly in front of me. "Happy birthday, Brooke. Go on, open it." I looked at the box, a sudden knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. Chelsea never gave gifts without an ulterior motive. Her presents were usually backhanded compliments, like the time she gave me a gym membership because she said my posture was getting lazy from sitting at a desk all day. I forced a polite smile and slowly untied the silver ribbon. The room was dead silent, all eyes fixed on me. I pulled away the wrapping paper and lifted the lid of the box. Inside rested a commercial DNA testing kit. I stared at the small plastic tube and the instruction manual, my mind struggling to process what I was looking at. I glanced up at Chelsea, expecting her to explain the joke. "Since you have never really fit in with our aesthetic," Chelsea said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent dining room. I figured it was time for some answers. "Maybe this will explain why you are another man's mistake of the family." A few people at the table gasped quietly, but then Chelsea let out a loud, sharp laugh. It was a cruel, cutting sound. I looked immediately at my mother, expecting her to intervene to reprimand Chelsea for saying something so vile in front of our family friends. Instead, Linda raised her hand to her mouth, her eyes crinkling at the corners as she actively tried to stifle a giggle. She found it funny. She actually found it amusing that my sister was publicly humiliating me. I turned my gaze to Gregory. He did not look angry at Chelsea. He looked annoyed with the tension in the room. He rolled his eyes, took a sip of his expensive red wine, and muttered, "Chelsea, do not waste your money on her. Stop being so dramatic. Brooke just put the box away. He was telling me to stop being dramatic, even though I had not said a single word. In that moment, sitting under the sparkling chandeliers, a profound shift happened inside me. For 34 years, I had accepted my role as the scapegoat. I had swallowed the insults, the dismissive comments, and the blatant favoritism because I believed that family was supposed to stick together. I had thought that if I just worked hard enough, if I was just responsible and successful enough, they would eventually respect me. But looking at my mother stifling her laughter and my father dismissing my humiliation, I realized the absolute truth. They did not love me. They did not even respect me as a human being. I was just a prop in their perfect wealthy lives, the ugly duckling they kept around to make their golden swan look brighter. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I closed the lid of the box and calmly slipped it into my leather tote bag. I did not yell. I did not throw a tantrum. My heart was pounding furiously against my ribs, but my hands were completely steady. I reached into my wallet and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. I placed it gently on the white tablecloth next to my half-empty water glass. Since I am apparently not family, I said, my voice quiet, even, and terrifyingly calm. I will not be enjoying the dinner tab you are about to cover. This is for my salad. Gregory frowned, his face flushing slightly. Brooke, sit down. Do not make a scene in front of our guests. I stood up, pushing my chair back. The scraping sound echoed loudly. Chelsea crossed her arms, a smug, victorious look on her face. Running away to your cheap apartment on your cheap forensic accountant's salary, Chelsea mocked. Classic Brooke, always the victim. I looked my sister dead in the eyes. I am not a victim, Chelsea. I am just finally done pretending I share blood with someone as classless as you. I turned and walked out of the private dining room. I kept my spine perfectly straight and my head held high, ignoring the shocked whispers of the guests behind me. I walked out of the steakhouse and into the freezing Chicago rain, pulling my coat tight around my shoulders. The cold air hit my face, and for the first time all night, I took a deep, full breath. I felt shattered but strangely liberated. When I got back to my apartment, I threw my purse onto the kitchen counter. The brightly wrapped box spilled out, the DNA kit glaring at me under the harsh kitchen lights. My first instinct was to throw it directly into the trash. It was a symbol of Chelsea's cruelty, a toxic joke meant to demean me. But as I stood there staring at it, my auditor brain took over. I dealt with facts. I dealt with evidence. Chelsea had made a joke about me not belonging to the family. I decided right then and there that I was going to take the test. I was going to take it, get the results showing a clear, undeniable genetic match to Gregory and Linda, and I was going to frame the results. I wanted to shove the biological proof in Chelsea's face to show her that she was permanently tied to me no matter how much she hated it. I ripped open the packaging, swabbed the inside of my cheek with sharp, angry motions, sealed the vial in the return envelope, and dropped it in the mailbox down the street before I could change my mind. The testing company stated it would take about 6 weeks to process the sample. Over those 6 weeks, I buried myself in my work. Ironically, I was employed as a senior compliance auditor for Gregory's commercial real estate firm. I had gotten the job on my own merit, climbing the corporate ladder through grueling hours and flawless performance reviews, though Gregory always acted as if he had handed me a charity position. I spent my days analyzing spreadsheets, verifying tenant leases, and ensuring the company's financial practices met federal regulations. I did not speak to my family during that time. Linda texted me once to ask if I was still throwing a tantrum, to which I did not reply. Chelsea posted endless photos of her lavish lifestyle online, completely unfazed by the bridge she had burned. I focused on my ledgers, waiting for the day I could drop the DNA results on their pristine kitchen island and demand an apology. 6 weeks later, on a quiet Tuesday evening, I was sitting on my couch with my laptop reviewing a particularly complex property acquisition file for work. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was an email notification from the DNA testing company. Your genetic results are ready to view. I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. I closed my work files, opened my personal browser, and logged into the testing portal. I typed in my password, my fingers moving quickly over the keys. The screen loaded, bringing up a colorful dashboard filled with pie charts and geographic maps showing my ancestral origins. I bypassed the historical data and clicked directly on the DNA matches tab. I wanted the hard evidence of my parentage. The page loaded. I scanned the list of closest relatives looking for the inevitable link to Gregory's side of the family, or at least a confirmed connection to Linda's well-documented lineage. I stared at the screen. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. There was a confirmed match for my mother. Linda's genetic profile was clearly linked to mine as a parent, but the paternal side was completely empty of any names I recognized. I scrolled through the data, my chest tightening with confusion. The system allowed you to see genetic traits inherited from each parent. I cross-referenced the paternal markers. There was 0% match with Gregory's family line. 0. My breath caught in my throat. The screen blurred as the reality of the numbers crashed into my analytical mind. Numbers did not lie. Data did not lie. Chelsea's cruel, flippant joke at the steakhouse had not been a joke at all. It had been an accidental, devastating truth. Gregory was not my biological father. I sat frozen on the couch, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating the shock on my face. 34 years of my life, my entire identity, the very foundation of my family structure, had just been wiped out by a simple pie chart. Linda had lied to me. She had lied to Gregory. Or maybe Gregory knew, and that was why he had always looked at me with such cold detachment. That was why he had so easily dismissed me while showering Chelsea with affection and wealth. I really was another man's child. My mind was reeling, trying to process the magnitude of this betrayal. Who was my father? Was it a brief affair? Did the man even know I existed? Before I could spiral further into the panic, a small red notification bubble popped up in the top right corner of the portal. It was a direct message on the platform's internal communication system. My hands were shaking as I moved the cursor and clicked on the glowing red icon. The message was from a user whose profile listed him as a verified first cousin on my newly discovered paternal side. His name was Liam Pierce. I opened the message. The text was short, but the words hit me with the force of a freight train. Brooke. The message read, "If your mother is Linda, you need to contact us immediately. We have been searching for the biological heir to the Pierce estate for 33 years. I read the words over and over again, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it physically hurt. The Pierce estate. Heir. Searching for 33 years. This was not a simple case of a hidden affair. This was not just a mother's lie to cover up a mistake. The specific use of the word heir implied something massive, something legal, something that had been deliberately hidden from me for my entire existence. My mother had not just kept my father's identity a secret. She had kept me hidden from a family that had been actively hunting for me since I was an infant. I sat alone in my quiet apartment, the rain tapping gently against the window glass. The life I knew had ended the moment Chelsea handed me that silver box. But looking at the message from Liam Pierce, I realized that my true life, the one I had been denied, was just beginning. And armed with my skills as an auditor, I was going to uncover every single secret my mother had buried. I stepped out of the steakhouse and into the freezing Chicago rain. The heavy wooden doors closed behind me, cutting off the sound of Chelsea's laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses. I pulled my coat tightly around my shoulders, shivering as the cold wind whipped through the downtown streets. For the first time all evening, I took a full deep breath. The air smelled of wet asphalt and exhaust, but it felt cleaner than the suffocating atmosphere of that private dining room. I hailed a cab and sat in the back seat, watching the city lights blur against the rain-streaked window. My heart was still pounding against my ribs, a steady rhythm of anger and adrenaline. When I finally unlocked the door to my apartment, the quiet emptiness of the space was a massive relief. I threw my leather tote bag onto the kitchen counter. The brightly wrapped box spilled out the commercial DNA testing kit, sliding across the smooth granite surface. It glared at me under the harsh kitchen lights, a physical manifestation of my family's cruelty. My initial instinct was to sweep it directly into the trash can. It was nothing more than a prop in Chelsea's ongoing campaign to make me feel small, a toxic joke designed to humiliate me in front of Gregory and Linda's affluent friends. But as I stood there staring at the plastic tube and the instruction manual, A different thought began to take root. As a financial compliance auditor, my entire career was built on verifying facts. I spent my days tracing irregularities, exposing hidden truths, and relying on undeniable data. Chelsea had made a public spectacle out of claiming I did not belong in their pristine family lineage. She had mocked my very existence. A dark, spiteful resolve settled over me. I was going to take the test. I was going to send in my sample weight for the results to confirm my undeniable genetic link to Gregory and Linda, and then I was going to frame the official report. I wanted to shove the biological proof right in Chelsea's smug face, forcing her to accept that we were permanently bound by blood no matter how much she despised me. I tore open the sterile packaging with sharp, deliberate motions. I swabbed the inside of my cheek exactly as the instructions dictated, sealed the vial inside the prepaid return envelope, and walked right back out of my apartment. I marched down the block to the blue postal box on the corner and dropped the envelope inside before I could second-guess my decision. The heavy metal flap clanged shut, echoing in the quiet street. The testing company stated that it would take approximately 6 weeks to process the sample. Over those 6 weeks, I threw myself entirely into my work. Ironically, I was employed as a senior compliance auditor for Gregory's massive commercial real estate firm. I had secured the position strictly on my own merit, climbing the corporate ladder through grueling hours, late nights, and consistently flawless performance reviews. Despite my hard work, Gregory always treated my employment as a charitable favor. He had granted me a narrative he frequently repeated at family gatherings. I spent my days analyzing spreadsheets, auditing tenant leases, and ensuring the company's financial practices met strict federal regulations. I did not speak to my family during that entire period. Linda sent one passive-aggressive text, asking if I was still throwing a tantrum, which I deleted without responding. Chelsea continued to post endless photos of her lavish, funded lifestyle online, completely unfazed by the bridge she had burned. I focused solely on my ledgers, waiting for the day I could drop the DNA results on their kitchen island. 6 weeks later, on a quiet Tuesday evening, I was sitting on my couch reviewing a particularly complex property acquisition file. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was an email notification from the DNA testing company. The subject line read that my genetic results were finally ready to view. I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. I closed my work files, opened my personal internet browser, and logged into the testing portal. I typed in my password, my fingers moving quickly over the keys. The screen loaded, bringing up a colorful dashboard filled with pie charts and geographic maps showing my ancestral origins. I completely bypassed the historical data and clicked directly on the DNA Matches tab. I wanted the hard evidence of my parentage. The page loaded slowly. I scanned the list of closest relatives, looking for the inevitable link to Gregory's side of the family, or at least a confirmed connection to Linda's well-documented lineage. I stared at the screen. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. There was a confirmed match for my mother. Linda's genetic profile was clearly linked to mine as a parent, but the paternal side was completely empty of any names I recognized. I scrolled through the data, my chest tightening with confusion. The system allowed you to view the specific genetic traits inherited from each parent. I cross-referenced the paternal markers against the database. There was a 0% match with Gregory's family line. 0. My breath caught in my throat. The glowing screen completely blurred as the harsh reality of the numbers crashed heavily into my analytical mind. Numbers did not lie. Data did not lie. Chelsea's cruel, flippant joke at the steakhouse had not been a joke at all. It had been an accidental, devastating truth. Gregory was not my biological father. I sat frozen on the couch, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating the absolute shock on my face. 34 years of my life, my entire identity, the very foundation of my family structure, had just been wiped out by a simple pie chart. Linda had lied to me. She had lied to Gregory. Or maybe Gregory knew, and that was exactly why he had always looked at me with such cold detachment. That was why he had so easily dismissed me while showering Chelsea with endless affection and immense wealth. I really was another man's child. My mind was reeling, trying to process the sheer magnitude of this betrayal. Who was my father? Was it a brief affair? Did the man even know I existed? All the times I had tried to earn Gregory's love, all the times I had worked myself to exhaustion to make him proud, flashed through my mind like a cruel montage. I had spent my entire life trying to be a good daughter to a man who shared absolutely no blood with me. Before I could spiral further into the panic, a small red notification bubble popped up in the top right corner of the portal. It was a direct message on the platform's internal communication system. My hands were shaking as I moved the cursor and clicked on the glowing red icon. The message was from a user whose profile listed him as a verified first cousin on my newly discovered paternal side. His screen name was clearly listed as Liam Pierce. I opened the message holding my breath. The text was incredibly short, but the words hit me instantly with the devastating force of a runaway freight train. Brooke, the message read. If your mother is Linda, you need to contact us immediately. We have been searching for the biological heir to the Pierce estate for 33 years. I read the words over and over again, my heart hammering against my ribs. The wealthy Pierce estate, heir, searching for 33 years. This was not a mother's lie to cover up a mistake. The specific use of the word heir implied something massive that had been deliberately hidden from me for my entire existence. My mother had kept me hidden from a family that had been actively hunting for me since I was an infant. A cold, quiet fury replaced the initial shock. I did not reply to Liam Pierce. Not yet. I needed to look my mother in the eyes and watch her explain how she could steal my identity. I connected my work laptop to the wireless printer sitting on my desk. The machine hummed to life, spitting out crisp pages of my DNA breakdown and the direct message. I folded the warm papers, shoved them into my coat pocket, and grabbed my car keys. The drive from my downtown apartment to the sprawling northern suburbs took 45 minutes. The rain had stopped, leaving the night air biting and sharp. My mind raced through 1,000 different lies Linda might try to spin. The hypocrisy made me feel ill. I pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates of my parents' estate. The security guard recognized my car and waved me through. I drove up the meticulously manicured driveway and parked behind Chelsea's bright red sports car. I unlocked the heavy mahogany front door and stepped into the grand foyer. I walked straight past the formal living room and headed for the kitchen at the back of the house. Linda was standing at the massive marble island, wearing a silk robe and pouring a glass of sparkling water. Chelsea was sitting on a velvet bar stool a few feet away, scrolling through her phone. They both looked up as I marched into the room, their expressions shifting from surprise to immediate annoyance. "Brooke," my mother said, letting out a long theatrical sigh. "I see you have decided to stop throwing your little tantrum." I did not say a single word. I walked directly up to the marble island, reached into my pocket, and pulled out the folded papers. I slammed them down onto the counter right next to her crystal glass. "I am not here to apologize," I said, my voice dangerously steady. "I am here to listen to you explain this." Linda frowned, her perfectly arched eyebrows drawing together. She read the first page, her eyes scanning the bold text highlighting the 0% genetic match with Gregory. For a moment, absolute silence hung in the kitchen. I fully expected her to crumble under the weight of her own lie being exposed. Instead, something entirely different happened. Linda carefully set the papers back down on the marble counter. She smoothed her silk robe, took a slow sip of her sparkling water, and looked at me. The maternal, concerned facade she wore for her country club friends completely melted away. Her eyes went flat and cold, devoid of any warmth or regret. So she said, her voice completely devoid of emotion, "You took the test." "That is all you have to say?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "You lied to me for 34 years. You lied to Gregory. Who is my real father? Who are the Pierces?" Chelsea let out a bark of laughter. "Wait, are you serious? The test actually said you are not Dad's kid. Oh, this is rich." "Shut up, Chelsea." Linda snapped, not looking away from me. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms over her chest. Your father was a delusional, penniless architect. We had a brief, meaningless affair before I married Gregory. He was a struggling loser who talked big about building cities but could barely afford to pay his rent. I realized very quickly that he could never provide the life I deserved. I stared at her, sickened by the casual, callous way she described the man who gave me life. And you just never bothered to tell me. Or Gregory. Gregory knows exactly who you really are, Linda said coldly. He has always known. When I found out I was pregnant with you, the architect was already out of the picture. I was terrified. My family would have disowned me for having a child out of wedlock with a nobody. Gregory stepped in. He graciously agreed to marry me to claim you as his own and to save my reputation. He gave you his name so you would not have to grow up as a bastard child. The room started to spin. Gregory knew. The man who had spent my entire life treating me like a burdensome employee who had favored Chelsea at every turn had known all along that I was not his blood. They had both agreed to this arrangement, forcing me to live in a home where I was secretly viewed as a shameful obligation. You kept me from my real family, I said, pointing a shaking finger at the printed message. This man says they have been looking for me for 33 years. You hid me from them. I protected you from a life of mediocrity, Linda fired back. Do you have any idea what your life would have been like if Gregory had not taken you in? You grew up in mansions. You went to the best private schools. You owe us a lifetime of gratitude for giving you this life. Gratitude. I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. You gave me a lifetime of emotional abuse. You made me feel completely worthless every single day because I was a constant reminder of your mistake. You did not protect me. You protected yourself. While Linda and I were arguing, I caught a sudden movement out of the corner of my eye. Chelsea had subtly propped her phone up against a fruit bowl on the counter. The camera lens was pointed directly at me, and the small red light indicated she was recording a video. A very fresh wave of disgust washed over me. She was recording the most devastating, vulnerable moment of my entire life. She was capturing my mother, calling my biological father a penniless loser, and telling me I was a shameful secret. I knew exactly what Chelsea planned to do with that footage. She was going to send it to her elite social circle, to the group chats filled with women who had always looked down on me. Chelsea, turn that phone off right now, I demanded. Chelsea just smirked, picking up the phone but keeping the camera aimed right at my face. Why? People deserve to know the truth about the family disappointment. You are not even a real part of this family. You are literally just some random charity case Dad took pity on. This is going to get so many views. Give me the phone right now, I warned her. Linda stepped between us, holding her hand out to stop me. Do not touch your sister, Brooke. You have no right to come into this house and make demands. You are the one who decided to dig up the past. Now you have to live with the consequences of what you found. I looked back and forth between the two of them. The sheer malice radiating from them was suffocating. They felt absolutely no remorse. They felt no guilt for stealing my identity, for hiding my biological family, or for treating me like a second-class citizen. Before I could take another step toward Chelsea, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway leading to the kitchen. Gregory walked into the room dressed in his expensive silk pajamas, his face dark with fury. What is all this shouting about? Gregory demanded, glaring at me. I thought I told you to go back to your apartment and stop causing trouble. I stood my ground, refusing to be intimidated by the man who had stolen my life. I was no longer the compliant daughter. I was the auditor uncovering fraud. Gregory stood in the doorway of the kitchen, his posture rigid, and his eyes locked onto the printed DNA results resting on the marble island. He marched forward, snatching the papers before I could reach them. He read the bold text, his jaw tightening with every second that passed. I waited for the explosion. I expected him to shout, to demand explanations from Linda, to show even a fraction of the betrayal a normal husband would feel upon seeing this evidence on a random Tuesday night. Instead, Gregory folded the papers and slipped them into his robe. He looked at me, devoid of shock. He was not a man uncovering a secret. He was a man dealing with a breached contract. What exactly do you think you are accomplishing here, Brooke? Gregory asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Do you think bringing this garbage into my home gives you some sort of leverage? It is not garbage, I replied, keeping my feet planted firmly on the hardwood floor. It is biological proof. You knew. You knew my entire life that I was not your daughter, and you let me spend 34 years trying to earn your love. Love is an investment, Gregory said coldly. I invested my name, my resources, and my reputation into hiding your mother's careless mistake. I gave you a position at my firm. I expected a return on that investment in the form of loyalty. Clearly, you are a bad asset. He was speaking about my life as if it were a failed real estate acquisition. I am a human being, I said, my voice shaking with grief and rage. I am your daughter, or at least I thought I was. Chelsea scoffed from her bar stool, holding her phone up to record. Oh, please, you were a charity project. Dad just did not want the country club to know Mom had a fling with a broke loser. You should be thanking him. Gregory held up a hand, silencing Chelsea instantly. You have crossed a line tonight, Brooke. You went digging into matters that do not concern you. You brought unauthorized DNA tests into my house. I do not tolerate insubordination in my home, and I certainly do not tolerate it in my company. I am saying you are fired, Gregory stated, his tone completely matter-of-fact. Effective immediately. You are no longer the senior compliance auditor for my firm. Security will have your desk cleared out and your personal items boxed up by morning. You cannot fire me for a personal family dispute, I argued. I have flawless performance reviews. I just saved your commercial division $2 million in tax liabilities last quarter. I earned that position. Gregory let out a condescending laugh. You earned nothing. You have that job because I allowed you to have it. I put you there to keep an eye on you, but since you want to bite the hand that feeds you, the charity ends tonight. You cannot do this, I said, my voice rising. I have a contract. I have stock options. Read your contract, Brooke, Gregory countered smoothly. There is a strict morality clause, and causing public embarrassment to the CEO is a fireable offense. You are done. Since you are no longer an employee, you are no longer entitled to live in company-subsidized housing. My blood ran completely cold. The downtown apartment I lived in, the beautiful space I had made my sanctuary, was technically owned by a subsidiary of Gregory's real estate empire. You are evicting me, I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises, Gregory said. If you are still in that apartment on Friday morning, I will have building security physically remove you and your belongings thrown onto the sidewalk. Linda watched this exchange without a single ounce of pity. She took another slow sip of her sparkling water, looking completely unbothered by his threats. She was choosing her wealthy lifestyle over me, just as always. This is insane, I said. You are going to throw me out on the street because I found out the truth about my own father. I am protecting my family, Gregory corrected. I will give you a choice. He walked over to a leather briefcase sitting on a nearby console table, snapped the brass locks open, and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He returned to the kitchen island and slapped the papers down next to Linda's glass. This is a non-disclosure agreement, Gregory explained. It dictates that you will never publicly or privately discuss the circumstances of your parentage. You will never contact this delusional architect's family, and you will surrender all copies of that DNA test to me. I stared at the thick stack of legalese placed on the counter. And if I sign it, if you sign it, Gregory said, you can keep your job and your apartment. We will pretend this unfortunate tantrum never happened, but if you refuse to sign it, I will personally ensure that you never work in the financial sector in Chicago ever again. I will blacklist you so thoroughly you will not be able to get a job managing a fast food register. The threat was not empty. Gregory wielded immense power in the city. He was offering me a choice between my livelihood and my truth. He wanted to buy my silence to shove me back into the dark closet where I had spent my entire life. Chelsea leaned forward on her stool. Just sign the papers, Brooke, Chelsea mocked. We all know you are too weak to survive without Dad's money. You have always been a coward. I thought about the grueling hours I had spent auditing Gregory's accounts, the decades I had wasted trying to fit into a family that viewed me as a shameful stain. I thought about the direct message sitting in my inbox from Liam Pierce. Gregory held out an expensive gold fountain pen waiting for my compliance. I reached out and took the pen from his hand. I held it for a long moment, feeling the heavy cold metal against my skin. Gregory smirked, assuming he had won. Linda let out a small sigh of relief. I looked Gregory dead in the eyes, snapped the expensive gold pen cleanly in half, and dropped the leaking broken pieces directly onto the non-disclosure agreement. Dark blue ink spread across the crisp white legal paper, ruining the document completely. Gregory's face twisted into an expression of pure, unadulterated rage. He lunged forward, but I was already stepping back, putting distance between us. "I do not want your job," I said, my voice echoing loudly in the kitchen. "I do not want your apartment, and I absolutely do not want your name. You can keep your money, Gregory. You are going to need it to pay your public relations team." I turned my back on them and walked out of the kitchen. I walked with deliberate, purposeful strides, listening to Gregory screaming my name behind me. I ignored him. I ignored Linda telling Chelsea to stop recording. I ignored the sprawling mansion that had never truly been my home. I drove back to the city with a fierce, burning clarity. The fear that had always kept me subservient was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating determination. I had 48 hours to pack up my entire life, but I only needed one. I pulled my suitcases from the closet and began throwing my clothes and my work laptops into them. I packed methodically, my auditor brain categorizing my assets for a swift departure. I left everything Gregory had ever paid for. Once my bags were packed and waiting by the front door, I sat down on the edge of the mattress. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and opened the testing portal. The message from Liam Pierce was still waiting, a digital ghost reaching out from a past I had been denied. My fingers were completely steady as I typed my response. "I am Brooke," I wrote. "Linda is my mother. I just walked away from her and Gregory for good. Tell me everything I need to know about the Pierces right now." I read the words over and over again, my heart hammering against my ribs. The wealthy Pierce estate. Heir. Searching for 33 years. This was not a mother's lie to cover up a mistake. The specific use of the word heir implied something massive that had been deliberately hidden from me for my entire existence. My mother had kept me hidden from a family that had been actively hunting for me since I was an infant. A cold, quiet fury replaced the initial shock. I did not reply to Liam Pierce immediately. I needed to ensure my digital footprint was secure before I made contact with a man who could completely alter my reality. I closed the testing portal and shut down my personal laptop. I slid it into my travel backpack along with my secure hard drives and auditing software tokens. I left the keys to the company-subsidized apartment sitting directly on the gleaming granite kitchen counter. I did not look back as I walked out the door and descended into the parking garage. I drove my car out of the downtown sector, navigating through the slick, rain-washed streets of Chicago, until the towering skyscrapers gave way to the sprawling industrial outskirts of the city. I drove until I found a cheap, unremarkable motel right off the interstate highway. I paid for a full week in advance using a personal credit card entirely disconnected from Gregory's financial ecosystem. The motel room smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke and harsh industrial cleaning chemicals, a very stark contrast to the immaculate luxury I had grown accustomed to. But as I locked the heavy deadbolt and pulled the thin curtains shut, I felt entirely safe for the first time in my life. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress and pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened the application and finally typed my response to the direct message. "I am Brooke," I wrote. "Linda is my mother. I just walked away from her and Gregory for good. Tell me everything I need to know about the Pierces right now." The reply from Liam appeared on my screen almost instantly, as if he had been sitting at his computer waiting for years just to see me type those words. He did not ask any probing questions about my sudden departure or the hostility radiating from my message. He simply provided an address for a small, independently owned coffee shop on the far west side of the city and told me he would be waiting there at 8 o'clock the following morning. I set the phone on the bedside table and lay back against the pillows. I barely slept that night. My mind was a relentless whirlwind of shifting realities, calculating thoughts, and decades of suppressed grief finally demanding to be felt. The next morning, the sky was a bruised, heavy gray, threatening more freezing rain. I parked my car 2 blocks away from the coffee shop and walked the rest of the way, my collar pulled up against the biting wind. The small brass bell above the door chimed cheerfully as I walked into the warm, roasted, coffee-scented interior. The place was mostly empty, save for a few older locals reading morning newspapers. I spotted him immediately. He was sitting in a quiet corner booth nursing a mug of black coffee. He was a man in his late 30s, wearing a tailored navy peacoat that suggested a quiet, unassuming wealth. As I approached the wooden table, he looked up, and my breath caught sharply in my throat. He had my eyes. He possessed the exact same shade of hazel, the exact same slight downward tilt at the outer corners. For 34 years, I had desperately searched for my own reflection in Gregory and Linda's faces, and found absolutely nothing but cold indifference. Looking at Liam Pierce was like looking at an older male version of myself. It was the most validating moment of my entire existence. "You are," Brooke Liam said, standing up and offering his hand across the table. His voice was warm, carrying a gentle, steady authority. I took his hand, feeling a strange, immediate sense of profound grounding. "I am," I replied, sliding into the vinyl booth across from him. "You said you have been looking for me. You said my father was not some penniless architect." Liam gave a sad, knowing smile. He reached down to the floor and lifted a heavy, weathered leather satchel onto the table, slowly unbuckling the brass straps. "Your mother told you he was a failure," Liam said softly. "That is exactly what Gregory paid her to say. Your biological father was Jonathan Pierce. He was not just an architect. He was a brilliant visionary structural engineer. Jonathan is the man who designed and patented the commercial building frameworks that revolutionized urban development in this entire city. He was the original founder and the sole patent holder of the very real estate empire that Gregory currently claims as his own." I stared at Liam, my hands trembling slightly as I grasped the edge of the table. The massive firm I had spent the last decade auditing, the company Gregory ruled with an iron fist, had not been built by Gregory at all. Gregory was nothing but a junior administrative partner. Liam continued pulling a thick stack of yellowed, fragile documents from the leather satchel. He handled the basic accounting and the mundane legal filings, while Jonathan handled the innovation and the actual business development. They were partners on paper, but Jonathan was the golden goose. Then, when you were barely 6 months old, Jonathan died in a highly suspicious car accident on a rural highway during a heavy rainstorm. My stomach plummeted rapidly. A car accident. The local police ruled it a tragic loss of control due to severe weather, Liam said, his jaw tightening with lingering anger. But my family never believed it for a second. Jonathan was an incredibly cautious driver, and he knew that rural road like the back of his hand. Almost immediately after the funeral, Gregory swooped in. He manipulated your mother, Linda, who was terrified, grieving, and entirely motivated by greed. Gregory convinced her that the company would completely collapse without his leadership, and that she would be left destitute. He married her less than 4 months later. As Jonathan's widow, Linda had temporary legal control over his assets. She signed everything over to Gregory. Gregory then absorbed the entire company, buried your father's legacy under a mountain of shadow corporations, and aggressively stonewalled my family when we tried to intervene. "Why did you not fight him in court?" I asked, feeling a massive surge of protective anger for the father I never had the chance to know. "We tried," Liam explained quietly, pushing a folder toward me. "My parents spent millions of dollars in legal fees trying to gain custody of you and trying to freeze the transfer of the corporate assets. But Gregory had forged partnership agreements dating back to before the accident, falsely claiming Jonathan had agreed to a full buyout in the event of his untimely death. With Linda backing Gregory completely, the judges threw our cases out of court. Gregory changed your last name, moved your mother to a highly secured gated compound, and explicitly threatened to destroy my family financially if we ever came near you." We lost the company, but losing you was the true heartbreak. We have been searching for you ever since, constantly waiting for the day you might take a genetic test and finally flag our system. Hot tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I reached out and touched the old faded photographs Liam had placed carefully on the table. There was a picture of a handsome man holding a tiny smiling baby. He had my nose. He had my strong chin. He looked at the baby with a level of pure, unadulterated love that I had never once experienced from Gregory or Linda. My entire life had been stolen to facilitate a corporate takeover. I had been raised by the very monsters who had erased my father from history to line their own pockets. I need everything you have in that bag, I told Liam, my voice hardening into pure steel. Every legal document, every old financial record, every failed lawsuit your family filed against him. Gregory fired me last night. He thinks he took away my power by taking away my job and my apartment. He forgot that he spent the last 10 years training me to be the most ruthless compliance auditor in Chicago. I'm going to tear his empire down to the studs. Liam smiled a fierce, proud expression that perfectly mirrored my own dark determination. He slid the entire heavy leather satchel across the wooden table. Welcome to the family brook. I returned to my cheap motel room just before noon. The neon vacancy sign outside my window flickered constantly, casting a harsh, rhythmic red glow over the dingy carpet. But I did not care about the aesthetics. I locked the heavy deadbolt, pulled the dusty blackout curtains tightly shut, and transformed the small laminate desk into a financial war room. I unpacked my personal laptop, a high-powered machine I had custom-built for massive data processing, and set up a secondary portable monitor I had brought with me. I connected to a secure encrypted virtual private network to completely mask my digital footprint. The emotional devastation of the morning was pushed firmly into a locked box in the back of my mind. Right now, I could not be a grieving, betrayed daughter. I had to be the apex predator of the financial sector. I opened the leather satchel Liam had given me and spread the fragile documents across the stiff bedspread. They were old tax filings, original property deeds from the 1990s, and incorporation papers bearing my biological father's authentic signature. I used these foundational documents as my starting point. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I logged into public county clerk databases, state corporate registries, and offshore tax evasion portals. I had spent a full decade auditing Gregory's clean, perfectly sanitized public ledgers. I knew exactly how he structured his legitimate business operations. Now I was aggressively looking for the dirt he swept under the rug. For the next 36 hours, I barely moved from the small desk. I drank terrible instant coffee and ate stale vending machine crackers, completely consumed by the hunt. I started mapping out Gregory's corporate structure on a complex digital whiteboard. I traced the original patents Jonathan Pierce had filed before his death. Gregory had not simply transferred them to his own name. That would have been entirely too obvious for an auditor to spot. Instead, he had sold the patents for literal pennies to a holding company in Delaware, which then licensed them to a shadow corporation in the Cayman Islands, which then leased them back to Gregory's primary real estate firm at an astronomical, artificially inflated markup. It was a classic, albeit highly sophisticated tax evasion and asset laundering scheme. But as I dug deeper into the offshore accounts, cross-referencing the hidden ledgers against the public financial statements, I noticed a severe vulnerability in Gregory's current financial ecosystem. Gregory was bleeding his own company dry. Over the last 5 years, Gregory had made several massive, highly publicized investments in modern commercial high-rises. Chelsea frequently bragged about these developments online, using them as backdrops for her influencer photos. However, by analyzing the local zoning permits, construction supply invoices, and commercial occupancy rates, I realized these new projects were catastrophic failures. They were millions of dollars over budget, stalled in construction limbo, and suffering from terrible tenant acquisition rates. Gregory was projecting immense strength to the public, but behind closed doors, he was actively drowning in insurmountable debt. To keep his failing modern investments afloat and fund Chelsea's lavish lifestyle, Gregory was illegally shifting capital away from the foundational assets my father had built. He was blatantly embezzling funds from his own minority shareholders, inflating property values on paper, while quietly draining the cash reserves to pay off his aggressive creditors. He was running a massive corporate shell game, and the foundation was completely rotting away underneath him. I meticulously downloaded every single fraudulent ledger, compiling them into a heavily encrypted password-protected folder on my hard drive. I had gathered enough concrete evidence of federal tax evasion, wire fraud, and corporate embezzlement to send Gregory to a federal penitentiary for the rest of his natural life. But putting him in prison was simply not enough. I wanted to take back what was rightfully mine. I wanted to reclaim my father's legacy and strip Gregory of the only thing he actually loved. At 2 o'clock in the morning on my third day in the motel, my eyes were burning intensely from staring at the bright screen. I was tracing a particularly convoluted routing number linked to the Delaware holding company when I spotted a glaring, bizarre anomaly. It was a recurring administrative fee paid out quarterly without fail for the last 30 years. The fee was not going to a registered vendor or a retainer for a law firm. It was being routed directly to an obscure, heavily guarded financial entity that did not match any of Gregory's usual naming conventions. I ran the routing number through a specialized banking database I had retained access to from my auditing days. The security protocols surrounding this specific account were military-grade, far beyond anything Gregory usually employed for his shell companies. It took me 3 grueling hours of brute force data mining and intentionally bypassing basic firewall protections to finally unmask the name of the registered entity receiving the funds. The screen refreshed slowly, displaying a single line of bold black text against a stark white background. The entity was officially registered as the Vanguard Blind Trust. I leaned back in the cheap motel chair, my heart pounding a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. A blind trust was a specialized financial arrangement where the appointed trustees had full management discretion, but the beneficiaries had absolutely no knowledge of the holdings or the assets contained within it. But why would Gregory continuously pay a quarterly maintenance fee to a blind trust he did not actively control? Unless he was not the one who set it up in the first place. I cross-referenced the legal establishment date of the Vanguard Blind Trust against the records Liam had provided. It had been legally incorporated exactly 2 weeks before my biological father, Jonathan Pierce, died in that highly suspicious car accident. Gregory had not created this lockbox. Jonathan had. My father had known something was deeply wrong. He had known Gregory was a dangerous threat, and he had brilliantly set up a financial failsafe right before his untimely death. Gregory had been paying the administrative maintenance fees on this trust for 3 decades because he legally could not dissolve it without triggering a massive federal audit that would expose his entire fraudulent empire. He was permanently trapped by a ghost. I stared at the name on the screen, a fierce, triumphant smile spreading slowly across my face. Gregory thought he had taken everything from me. He thought he had effortlessly stripped me of my home, my job, and my family with a single stroke of a pen. He had absolutely no idea that he had just handed me the master key to his own complete destruction. I closed the laptop, the glow of the screen fading into the dark room. It was time to introduce Chelsea and Gregory to the real heir of the Pierce Empire. I closed the laptop, the glow of the screen fading into the dark room. It was time to introduce Chelsea and Gregory to the real heir of the Pierce Empire. But executing a corporate takeover of this massive magnitude required immense precision, ironclad legal representation, and significant capital. I could not fight a hostile billionaire on a dwindling personal savings account. I needed independent resources to sustain myself while the trap was meticulously set. The next morning, I officially checked out of the motel and leased a secure apartment on the south side of the city. I registered my own independent financial compliance consultancy with the state. Having spent a full decade building a sterling reputation among mid-level firms, I sent out heavily encrypted emails offering my services. Within 24 hours, I had 3 promising leads. But I severely underestimated my sister's relentless vindictiveness. Chelsea had always viewed my existence as a personal insult, and now that Gregory formally cast me out, she smelled blood in the water. She wanted to ensure I stayed broken, humiliated, and entirely destitute. The targeted sabotage began Thursday afternoon. I was reviewing a contract when the business owner called. He stammered a disjointed apology stating his board was pursuing a different direction. Pressed for a concrete reason, he hesitantly admitted receiving a highly concerning email from Gregory's Human Resources Department. It strongly implied I was terminated for workplace theft. A cold, heavy knot formed in my stomach. I opened my new business page online. The client review section, completely empty the night before, was suddenly flooded with dozens of one-star ratings. The vicious comments called me a fraud, a thief, and an unstable liability. I knew instantly who orchestrated this digital assault. I pulled up Chelsea's public social media profile on an anonymous burner account. She had just posted a new video. Sitting in the back of a luxury chauffeured car wearing oversized designer sunglasses, she sipped an expensive green juice. Some people just cannot handle the harsh consequences of their own toxic actions, Chelsea said directly to the camera, feigning a sad, sympathetic pout. A certain former employee at my dad's company got caught trying to steal. She was a massive mistake, and now she is exactly where she belongs, right in the gutter. Frauds always fail. She took a delicate sip of her juice, smiled brightly at the lens, and ended the video. I stared at the glowing screen, my grip tightening on my coffee mug until my knuckles turned white. Chelsea was using her platform and Gregory's corporate weight to systematically destroy my chance at earning a living wage. They wanted me crawling back to their heavy iron gates, begging for the meager charity Gregory had mockingly planned to offer me. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing the rising panic down. I was not the terrified, desperate girl they thought I was. I was the true, verified heir to the Pierce estate, and I was going to fight back with the only weapon they could never match. My absolute, undeniable brilliance. I had one pitch left on my calendar. It was a massive opportunity with Zenith Dynamics, a tech firm preparing for an initial public offering. They desperately needed a compliance overhaul before regulators started digging. This contract would guarantee my financial stability. There was a complication. The junior vice president of operations at Zenith Dynamics was Harrison. He ran in the exact same superficial social circles as Chelsea. If Chelsea was salting the earth behind me, Harrison had undoubtedly heard the malicious rumors. I spent 48 hours preparing. I did not just review Zenith's public financial statements. I completely dissected them line by line. I built a presentation so sharp that it would completely obliterate any lingering doubts about my professional integrity. The morning of the video pitch arrived. I set up my camera wearing a tailored navy blouse that projected absolute authority. 3 senior executives from Zenith Dynamics populated the screen, including Harrison, who looked notably skeptical. His arms were crossed tightly, his expression heavily guarded. "Before we begin," Harrison said abruptly, cutting off my greeting, "I need to be entirely transparent, Brooke. We received a disturbing anonymous tip regarding your sudden departure from your previous auditing firm. The specific word theft was explicitly used. We cannot risk our upcoming public offering by associating with a legal liability." The air in my apartment felt heavy, but my heart remained perfectly steady. I looked directly into the camera lens, meeting Harrison's skeptical gaze without a flinch. "I appreciate your transparency, Harrison," I said, my voice smooth and commanding. "It is true I recently left my former employer. But I was not terminated for theft. I left because I uncovered a level of systemic fraud that I flatly refused to be complicit in." The 3 executives visibly shifted in their leather seats, suddenly leaning much closer to their respective screens. "Let me show you exactly why you need me auditing your internal ledgers," I continued. I shared my screen, pulling up a highly redacted, beautifully stylized version of the digital whiteboard I had built in that motel room. I used Gregory's exact financial ecosystem as a hypothetical case study. I walked them step by step through the devastatingly brilliant shell game Gregory had been playing for 3 decades. I showed them precisely how a clean parent company could secretly sell patents to a Delaware entity, license them to a Cayman Islands shadow corporation, and lease them back at a wildly inflated markup. I explained how this specific structure artificially inflated property values while simultaneously draining cash reserves to hide massive failing investments. I carefully watched the executives' faces change in real time. The initial skepticism completely vanished, rapidly replaced by absolute awe. I was speaking a complex financial language they only vaguely understood, doing it with the effortless, sharp precision of a master surgeon. This kind of deeply embedded structural rot is invisible to a standard auditor, I explained. A standard auditor merely looks at the sanitized public ledger and signs off. But federal regulators preparing for an initial public offering will always look for the shadows. I do not just look at the ledger, I look directly into the shadows. I know exactly how bad actors hide their money, and I know exactly how to fortify your company so that no regulator will ever find a single vulnerability. The virtual meeting room was completely silent. Harrison slowly uncrossed his arms, a look of profound respect washing over his face. The petty rumors he had heard from Chelsea's superficial circle were instantly rendered meaningless against the sheer weight of my professional competence. Brooke, the senior executive, finally said, his voice entirely devoid of doubt. That was the most terrifying and brilliant risk assessment I have ever seen. We do not just want you for a basic compliance review. We want you on a full multi-year retainer to oversee our entire public offering transition. A fierce, triumphant warmth bloomed brightly in my chest. I aggressively negotiated the final terms right there on the video call, securing a massive independent contract that guaranteed my financial independence and professional safety. They wired a highly substantial retainer fee directly to my secure business account before the end of the business day. Chelsea had desperately tried to bury me under a mountain of petty, malicious lies. She weaponized her platform and her unearned wealth to try to starve me into quiet submission. But she fundamentally misunderstood the high-stakes game we were playing. She was fighting a shallow social battle deeply concerned with optics and fake rumors. I was fighting a ruthless corporate war. I sat back in my leather desk chair and watched the six-figure retainer hit my secure bank account. I was fully funded. I was completely independent. And I was finally ready to spring the trap that would strip my family of everything they had ever stolen, forcing them to pay for every lie they told me. The sense of absolute security that washed over me was a foreign feeling. For my entire adult life, my financial stability had been directly tied to Gregory's fickle approval. Now the heavy chain connecting me to his real estate empire was permanently severed. I spent the next few days outfitting my new apartment on the south side, transforming the spare bedroom into a highly secure state-of-the-art home office. I purchased secondary firewall protections and routed all my internet traffic through offshore servers to ensure Gregory's corporate security team could never trace my digital footprint back to this location. My new client, Zenith Dynamics, kept me incredibly busy during daylight hours, but the moment the sun went down, my attention shifted entirely back to the Pierce estate. I had been monitoring Gregory's corporate accounts with the stealth of a ghost. Because I had designed the internal compliance architecture for his firm, I knew exactly which backdoor access points his current IT department routinely ignored. I was not altering any data or moving any funds. I was simply watching the numbers drop. Gregory was bleeding cash at an astonishing rate. The stalled commercial high-rise projects were draining his operational reserves, and his aggressive creditors were beginning to circle. It was during one of these late-night monitoring sessions that my phone buzzed with a news alert from a local Chicago society blog. I picked up the device and saw a high-resolution photograph of Chelsea. She was standing on the steps of the botanical garden, wearing a pristine white designer dress and holding her left hand up to the camera. A massive, ostentatious diamond ring sparkled under the flashing lights of the paparazzi. Standing next to her, looking incredibly smug and polished, was Julian Montgomery. Julian was a high-profile, notoriously snobby local politician who was currently running for a prominent city council seat. He came from a family of generational political elites who valued optics above all else. I tapped the article and read the glowing write-up. Chelsea and Julian were officially engaged. The article detailed their whirlwind romance and proudly announced that the wedding would take place in exactly 3 months at the most exclusive, ridiculously expensive country club in the city. The projected cost of the event was estimated at a staggering $500,000. The journalist quoted Linda, who boasted extensively about how Gregory was pulling out all the stops to give his youngest daughter the royal wedding she deserved. Linda went on to describe the imported floral arrangements, the custom-tailored couture gown, and the lavish multi-course menu they had already secured for the big day. I stared at the screen, a dry, cynical laugh escaping my throat. Gregory and Linda were parading their wealth in front of the local political elite, using Chelsea's high-profile engagement to project an image of untouchable financial supremacy. Julian Montgomery was only marrying into our family because he believed Gregory possessed an endless supply of corporate capital to fund his future political campaigns. But I was looking directly at the live, unedited ledger of Gregory's primary holding account on my secondary monitor. The account did not have $500,000 to spare. In fact, the account was dangerously close to overdrawing. To pay for Chelsea's extravagant wedding and maintain the illusion of their massive wealth, Gregory was going to have to make a desperate move. He was going to have to liquidate a significant portion of his foundational assets. He was trapped in a financial corner of his own making, driven entirely by his desperate need to maintain his public status. He had absolutely no idea that I was sitting across the city watching his empire crumble in real time. But watching him struggle to find liquid capital was merely a distraction from my ultimate goal. I turned my attention away from the Society blog and back to the heavily encrypted digital file I had extracted from the shadow ledgers days earlier. The file referencing the Vanguard Blind Trust. I had spent countless hours over the past week trying to break through the military-grade encryption guarding the trust documents. My biological father, Jonathan Pierce, had been a brilliant structural engineer, and he had applied that same flawless structural logic to his digital and legal protections. The file was locked behind a complex algorithmic wall that repelled every standard decryption software I threw at it. I poured a fresh cup of dark coffee, sat down at my desk, and stared at the command prompt blinking on my screen. I had been attacking the file using modern financial decoding methods. But Jonathan had not set this trust up in the modern era. He had established the Vanguard Blind Trust 33 years ago, right before his highly suspicious death. I needed to stop thinking like a modern compliance auditor and start thinking like a desperate father trying to protect his unborn child. I opened the folder Liam Pierce had given me at the coffee shop. I spread the old yellowed incorporation papers across my desk. I studied Jonathan's signature, the dates of his original patents, and the geographical coordinates of his very first commercial building project in Chicago. I started feeding these highly specific personal data points into my decryption software, creating a customized dictionary attack based entirely on Jonathan's life. The software churned for exactly 47 minutes. The cooling fan on my laptop whirred loudly, working overtime to process the massive influx of variables. I sat perfectly still, my eyes locked on the progress bar inching across the bottom of the screen. Suddenly, the fan quieted down. The command prompt vanished. A small, simple chime echoed through the silent apartment, and a standard PDF document materialized on my desktop. The lock had broken. I had decrypted the Vanguard Trust file. My hands were shaking as I moved the mouse and clicked the document open. The text was incredibly dense, filled with complex legal jargon and corporate bylaws. I read through the foundational structuring tracing the legal mechanisms Jonathan used to bind the core assets of his commercial real estate empire to this specific trust. Gregory spent decades thinking he had successfully stolen the company by having Linda sign over the public-facing assets. But Jonathan cleverly buried the true foundational patents and majority voting shares deep within the protective shell of the Vanguard Trust. I scrolled down to the execution clauses, my eyes scanning the text, until I found the specific section regarding the release of the assets. It was a dead man's switch. Jonathan had known his life was in imminent danger. He structured the trust so that upon his untimely death, the controlling assets would remain completely locked and untouchable by any external party, including his widow or any future business partners. Gregory was legally forced to pay the administrative maintenance fees for 3 decades simply to keep the trust dormant and avoid a federal audit exposing his theft. The dead man's switch had a highly specific, undeniable trigger. I read the final paragraph, my heart stopping in my chest. The document stated the blind trust would mature and dissolve upon the verified biological heir reaching their 34th birthday. The moment that age milestone was met, 51% controlling shares of the entire real estate empire, along with all foundational patents and associated liquid assets, would officially and irrevocably transfer to the biological child of Jonathan Pierce. The sense of absolute security that washed over me was a foreign feeling. For my entire adult life, my financial stability had been directly tied to Gregory's fickle approval. Now the heavy chain connecting me to his real estate empire was permanently severed. I spent the next few days outfitting my new apartment on the south side, transforming the spare bedroom into a highly secure state-of-the-art home office. I purchased secondary firewall protections and routed all my internet traffic through offshore servers to ensure Gregory's corporate security team could never trace my digital footprint back to this location. My new client, Zenith Dynamics, kept me incredibly busy during daylight hours. But the moment the sun went down, my attention shifted entirely back to the Pierce estate. I had been monitoring Gregory's corporate accounts with the stealth of a ghost. Because I had designed the internal compliance architecture for his firm, I knew exactly which backdoor access points his current information technology department routinely ignored. I was not altering data or moving any funds. I was simply watching the numbers drop. Gregory was bleeding cash at an astonishing rate. The stalled commercial high-rise projects were draining his operational reserves, and his aggressive creditors were beginning to circle. It was during one of these late-night monitoring sessions that my phone buzzed with a news alert from a local Chicago society blog. I picked up the device and saw a photograph of Chelsea. She was standing on the steps of the botanical garden, wearing a pristine white designer dress and holding her left hand up to the camera. A massive, ostentatious diamond ring sparkled under the flashing lights of the paparazzi. Standing next to her, looking incredibly smug and polished, was Julian Montgomery. Julian was a notoriously snobby local politician running for a city council seat. He came from a family of generational political elites who valued optics above all else. I tapped the article and read the glowing write-up. Chelsea and Julian were officially engaged. The article detailed their whirlwind romance and proudly announced that the wedding would take place in exactly 3 months at the most exclusive, ridiculously expensive country club in the city. The projected cost of the event was estimated at a staggering $500,000. The journalist quoted Linda, who boasted extensively about how Gregory was pulling out all the stops to give his youngest daughter the royal wedding she deserved. Linda went on to describe the imported floral arrangements, the custom-tailored couture gown, and the lavish multi-course menu they had already secured for the big day. I stared at the screen, a dry, cynical laugh escaping my throat. Gregory and Linda were parading their wealth in front of the local political elite, using Chelsea's high-profile engagement to project an image of untouchable financial supremacy. Julian Montgomery was only marrying into our family because he believed Gregory possessed an endless supply of corporate capital to fund his future political campaigns. But I was looking directly at the live, unedited ledger of Gregory's primary holding account on my secondary monitor. The account was dangerously close to overdrawing. To pay for Chelsea's extravagant wedding and maintain the illusion of their massive wealth, Gregory was going to have to make a desperate move. He was going to have to liquidate a significant portion of his foundational assets. He was trapped in a financial corner of his own making, driven entirely by his desperate need to maintain his public status. He had absolutely no idea that I was sitting across the city, watching his empire crumble in real time. But watching him struggle to find liquid capital was merely a distraction from my ultimate goal. I turned my attention away from the Society blog and back to the heavily encrypted digital file I had extracted from the shadow ledgers days earlier. The file referencing the Vanguard Blind Trust. I had spent countless hours over the past week trying to break through the military-grade encryption guarding the trust documents. My biological father, Jonathan Pierce, had been a brilliant structural engineer, and he had applied that same flawless structural logic to his digital and legal protections. The file was locked behind a complex algorithmic wall that repelled every standard decryption software I threw at it. I poured a fresh cup of dark coffee, sat down at my desk, and stared at the command prompt blinking on my screen. I had been attacking the file using modern financial decoding methods. But Jonathan had not set this trust up in the modern era. He had established the Vanguard Blind Trust 33 years ago, right before his highly suspicious death. I needed to stop thinking like a modern compliance auditor and start thinking like a desperate father trying to protect his unborn child. I opened the folder Liam Pierce had given me at the coffee shop. I spread the old yellowed incorporation papers across my desk. I studied Jonathan's signature, the dates of his original patents, and the geographical coordinates of his very first commercial building project in Chicago. I started feeding these highly specific personal data points into my decryption software, creating a customized dictionary attack based entirely on Jonathan's life. The software churned for exactly 47 minutes. The laptop fan word processing the variables. I sat perfectly still, my eyes locked on the progress bar inching across the bottom of the screen. Suddenly, the fan quieted down. The command prompt vanished. A small, simple chime echoed through the silent apartment, and a standard digital document materialized on my desktop. The lock had broken. I had decrypted the Vanguard Trust file. My hands were shaking as I moved the mouse and clicked the document open. The text was incredibly dense, filled with complex legal jargon and corporate bylaws. I read through the foundational structuring, tracing the legal mechanisms Jonathan used to bind the core assets of his commercial real estate empire to this specific trust. Gregory spent decades thinking he had successfully stolen the company by having Linda sign over the public-facing assets. But Jonathan cleverly buried the true foundational patents and majority voting shares deep within the protective shell of the Vanguard Trust. I scrolled down to the execution clauses, my eyes scanning the text, until I found the specific section regarding the release of the assets. It was a dead man's switch. Jonathan had known his life was in imminent danger. He structured the trust so that upon his untimely death, the controlling assets would remain completely locked and untouchable by any external party, including his widow or any future business partners. Gregory was legally forced to pay the administrative maintenance fees for 3 decades simply to keep the trust dormant and avoid a federal audit exposing his theft. The dead man's switch had a highly specific, undeniable trigger. I read the final paragraph, my heart stopping in my chest. The document stated the blind trust would mature and dissolve upon the verified biological heir reaching their 34th birthday. The moment that age milestone was met, 51% controlling shares of the entire real estate empire, along with all foundational patents and associated liquid assets, would officially and irrevocably transfer to the biological child of Jonathan Pierce. I had just turned 34 at that humiliating steakhouse dinner. The switch was already active. The entire empire was legally mine right now, and Gregory was running out of time. The morning sun crept through the blinds of my South Side apartment, casting long shadows across the printed pages of the Vanguard Trust. I sat quietly at my small wooden desk, sipping my cup of lukewarm coffee. I had total unmitigated ownership of the very ground Gregory walked on. My phone vibrated against the wooden surface, shattering the quiet stillness. The glowing caller identification immediately displayed Gregory's private personal cell phone number. I let it ring 3 full times, controlling my steady breathing before answering with a perfectly neutral tone. Gregory did not bother with pleasantries. He launched straight into a carefully rehearsed speech. He claimed Linda was distressed by our estrangement and that he wanted to clear the air. He summoned me to a reconciliation lunch the following afternoon at an exclusive French bistro in the financial district. His voice was smooth, carrying the practiced warmth of a corporate negotiator closing a routine deal, but I could hear the faint underlying strain of a man running out of options. I knew exactly why he was calling. The creditors were closing in. The vendors for Chelsea's $500,000 wedding were demanding their deposits, and Gregory desperately needed liquid capital. To get that capital, he had to sell a massive block of restricted company shares. But because of the foundational bylaws my biological father had embedded in the corporate charter, Gregory could not authorize the sale without a signed quitclaim deed from all recognized children. He needed my signature to survive the month. I told him I would be there, keeping my voice completely devoid of any emotion. I spent the next 24 hours carefully preparing my demeanor. I could not let Gregory sense even a fraction of the power I now held. I had to play the part he expected me to play. I needed to be the struggling cast-out daughter who might be desperate enough to take a terrible deal. I dressed in a simple, inexpensive beige blazer and a plain white blouse. I pulled my hair back into a severe, modest knot. The French bistro was a familiar territory for Gregory, a place designed to intimidate outsiders with its stark minimalist decor and hushed elitist atmosphere. I handed my coat to the hostess and was led to a secluded booth near the back of the restaurant. Gregory was already seated, nursing a glass of sparkling water. Sitting right next to him, tapping away on her phone with a look of profound boredom, was Chelsea. Her presence at a supposed reconciliation lunch was a blatant contradiction, but it fit perfectly with Gregory's true agenda. He brought the golden child along to mock me. He wanted to make me feel small, to remind me of the hierarchy, and to pressure me into absolute submission. I approached the table with measured steps, keeping my expression entirely passive. Chelsea glanced up from her screen, her eyes immediately zeroing in on my inexpensive blazer. She let out a soft, derisive scoff and went back to scrolling through her social media feed. Gregory gestured to the empty leather seat across from them. He did not stand to greet me. He simply offered a tight, artificial smile that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. "It is good of you to come," Brooke Gregory said, his tone dripping with profound condescension. "I ordered a light salad for you." I slid into the booth, placing my hands neatly on my lap. "Thank you," I replied, keeping my voice soft and subdued. "I appreciate the invitation. I was not sure we would be speaking again so soon." Gregory folded his hands on the table, adopting the rigid posture of a benevolent patriarch forgiving a deeply flawed child. "We are family," Brooke Gregory stated smoothly. "Families have disagreements. Your mother and I were deeply disappointed by your outburst, but we recognize that you were highly emotional. You made a poor choice, but I am not a vindictive man. I am willing to offer you a path forward, a way to close this unfortunate chapter cleanly so we can all move on with our respective lives." He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a crisp, white envelope. He placed it carefully on the pristine tablecloth right between us. He was treating the moment like a grand charitable gesture, masking his absolute financial desperation behind a heavy wall of corporate arrogance. "I have discussed the situation with our legal team," Gregory continued calmly. "Given the recent revelations regarding your parentage, it is legally necessary to formally separate our financial ties. It is just basic housekeeping, really. Standard corporate procedure to ensure there are no lingering liabilities for either party." He slid the envelope across the table until it touched the edge of my placement. Inside are 2 documents, he explained, his eyes watching me very closely. "The first is a simple quitclaim deed," Gregory said. "It formally waives any nominal residual rights you might claim to the company stock." I looked down at the envelope, my heart beating with a fierce, triumphant rhythm that I carefully concealed behind a blank stare. He was lying straight to my face. It was not a mere formality. It was the only barrier standing between him and total, irreversible financial ruin. The second document, Gregory said, leaning forward slightly, is a parting gift. I know you are likely struggling to pay rent in whatever substandard housing you have found. I am offering you a cashier's check for $5,000. You sign the waiver, you take the money, and we part ways with no further hostility. $5,000. He was desperately trying to buy the keys to a multi-million-dollar real estate empire for $5,000. Chelsea scoffed loudly, finally putting her phone down on the table. You should absolutely take it, Brooke, she mocked. A cruel, satisfied grin spread across Chelsea's face. $5,000 is incredibly generous considering you are literally nothing to us. You can use it to buy some clothes that do not look like they came from a discount rack. Seriously, that blazer is embarrassing. Just sign the paper and take the charity before Dad changes his mind and lets you starve. I stared at the thick legal document peeking out from the envelope. I thought about the decades of emotional abuse, the constant belittling, and the sheer audacity of this man trying to scam me today. Gregory watched me intently, waiting for the desperate broken girl to submit to his authority. I reached for the glass of ice water sitting next to my plate. I wrapped my fingers around the cold crystal. I looked Gregory directly in the eyes. I let a slow, genuine smile break across my face, shattering the submissive facade. I tipped the glass forward. The ice water spilled rapidly over the rim, cascading directly onto the white tablecloth and soaking the quitclaim deed. Gregory gasped, pushing his chair back as the water rushed toward his expensive suit. "What is wrong with you?" he demanded, his voice rising in panic and fury. I placed the empty glass back onto the table, feeling a powerful rush of absolute victory coursing through my veins. "I prefer to read the fine print in the presence of legal counsel," I said, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "Have your estate lawyer, Mr. Harrison, set up an official meeting next week. Bring the entire whole family." The morning sun crept through the blinds of my South Side apartment, casting long shadows across the printed pages of the Vanguard Trust. I sat quietly at my small wooden desk, sipping my cup of lukewarm coffee. I had total, unmitigated ownership of the very ground Gregory walked on. My phone vibrated against the wooden surface, shattering the quiet stillness. The glowing caller identification immediately displayed Gregory's private personal cell phone number. I let it ring 3 full times, controlling my steady breathing before answering with a perfectly neutral tone. Gregory did not bother with pleasantries. He launched straight into a carefully rehearsed speech. He claimed Linda was distressed by our estrangement and that he wanted to clear the air. He summoned me to a reconciliation lunch the following afternoon at an exclusive French bistro in the financial district. His voice was smooth, carrying the practiced warmth of a corporate negotiator closing a routine deal, but I could hear the faint underlying strain of a man running out of options. I knew exactly why he was calling. The creditors were closing in, the vendors for Chelsea's $500,000 wedding were demanding their deposits, and Gregory desperately needed liquid capital. To get that capital, he had to sell a massive block of restricted company shares. But because of the foundational bylaws my biological father had embedded in the corporate charter, Gregory could not authorize the sale without a signed quitclaim deed from all recognized children. He needed my signature to survive the month. I told him I would be there, keeping my voice completely devoid of any emotion. I spent the next 24 hours carefully preparing my demeanor. I could not let Gregory sense even a fraction of the power I now held. I had to play the part he expected me to play. I needed to be the struggling, cast-out daughter who might be desperate enough to take a terrible deal. I dressed in a simple, inexpensive beige blazer and a plain white blouse. I pulled my hair back into a severe, modest knot. The French bistro was a familiar territory for Gregory, a place designed to intimidate outsiders with its stark minimalist decor and hushed elitist atmosphere. I handed my coat to the hostess and was led to a secluded booth near the back of the restaurant. Gregory was already seated, nursing a glass of sparkling water. Sitting right next to him, tapping away on her phone with a look of profound boredom, was Chelsea. Her presence at a supposed reconciliation lunch was a blatant contradiction, but it fit perfectly with Gregory's true agenda. He brought the golden child along to mock me. He wanted to make me feel small, to remind me of the hierarchy and to pressure me into absolute submission. I approached the table with measured steps, keeping my expression entirely passive. Chelsea glanced up from her screen, her eyes immediately zeroing in on my inexpensive blazer. She let out a soft, derisive scoff and went back to scrolling through her social media feed. Gregory gestured to the empty leather seat across from them. He did not stand to greet me. He simply offered a tight, artificial smile that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. "It is good of you to come," Brooke Gregory said, his tone dripping with profound condescension. "I ordered a light salad for you." I slid into the booth, placing my hands neatly on my lap. "Thank you," I replied, keeping my voice soft and subdued. "I appreciate the invitation. I was not sure we would be speaking again so soon." Gregory folded his hands on the table, adopting the rigid posture of a benevolent patriarch forgiving a deeply flawed child. "We are family," Brooke Gregory stated smoothly. "Families have disagreements. Your mother and I were deeply disappointed by your outburst, but we recognize that you were highly emotional. You made a poor choice, but I am not a vindictive man. I am willing to offer you a path forward, a way to close this unfortunate chapter cleanly, so we can all move on with our respective lives." He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a crisp white envelope. He placed it carefully on the pristine tablecloth right between us. He was treating the moment like a grand charitable gesture, masking his absolute financial desperation behind a heavy wall of corporate arrogance. "I have discussed the situation with our legal team," Gregory continued calmly. "Given the recent revelations regarding your parentage, it is legally necessary to formally separate our financial ties. It is just basic housekeeping, really. Standard corporate procedure to ensure there are no lingering liabilities for either party." He slid the envelope across the table until it touched the edge of my placement. "Inside are two documents," he explained, his eyes watching me very closely. "The first is a simple quitclaim deed," Gregory said. "It formally waives any nominal residual rights you might claim to the company stock." I looked down at the envelope, my heart beating with a fierce, triumphant rhythm that I carefully concealed behind a blank stare. He was lying straight to my face. It was not a mere formality. It was the only barrier standing between him and total, irreversible financial ruin. "The second document," Gregory said, leaning forward slightly, "is a parting gift. I know you are likely struggling to pay rent in whatever substandard housing you have found. I am offering you a cashier's check for $5,000. You sign the waiver, you take the money, and we part ways with no further hostility." $5,000. He was desperately trying to buy the keys to a multi-million-dollar real estate empire for $5,000. Chelsea scoffed loudly, finally putting her phone down on the table. "You should absolutely take it, Brooke," she mocked. A cruel, satisfied grin spread across Chelsea's face. $5,000 is incredibly generous, considering you are literally nothing to us. You can use it to buy some clothes that do not look like they came from a discount rack. Seriously, that blazer is embarrassing. Just sign the paper and take the charity before Dad changes his mind and lets you starve." I stared at the thick legal document peeking out from the envelope. I thought about the decades of emotional abuse, the constant belittling, and the sheer audacity of this man trying to scam me today. Gregory watched me intently, waiting for the desperate broken girl to submit to his authority. I reached for the glass of ice water sitting next to my plate. I wrapped my fingers around the cold crystal. I looked Gregory directly in the eyes. I let a slow, genuine smile break across my face, shattering the submissive facade. I tipped the glass forward. The ice water spilled rapidly over the rim, cascading directly onto the white tablecloth and soaking the quitclaim deed. Gregory gasped, pushing his chair back as the water rushed toward his expensive suit. "What is wrong with you?" he demanded, his voice rising in panic and fury. I placed the empty glass back onto the table, feeling a powerful rush of absolute victory coursing through my veins. "I prefer to read the fine print in the presence of legal counsel," I said, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "Have your estate lawyer, Mr. Harrison, set up an official meeting next week. Bring the entire whole family." Gregory stared at the ruined document, the ice water soaking rapidly into the thick paper and causing the dark ink of his expensive fountain pen to bleed across the signature line. His face cycled through a rapid succession of colors, finally landing on a dangerous, mottled shade of crimson. He pushed his chair back, violently opening his mouth to unleash the kind of terrifying corporate fury that usually sent his subordinates running for cover. But he stopped abruptly. He looked at my face, searching for the desperate, compliant daughter he thought he knew. He found absolutely nothing but cold, unyielding stone. He realized in that exact moment that he was completely trapped. He needed my signature to legally release the restricted funds for Chelsea's extravagant wedding, and he knew that causing a massive public scene in the middle of this high-end bistro would only damage his carefully curated reputation. "Fine." Gregory hissed, his voice a tight, venomous whisper that barely carried over the ambient noise of the restaurant. "Next Wednesday at 10 o'clock. Do not be late, Brooke, and bring a pen." I did not offer him a polite farewell. I simply stood up, turned my back on them, and walked out of the establishment. I left them sitting in the wet, awkward aftermath of their failed manipulation. The moment I returned to my secure Southside apartment, the final countdown officially began. I had exactly 7 days to prepare the most devastating financial arsenal Gregory would ever face. I locked the heavy deadbolt, brewed a massive pot of dark coffee, and walked directly into my spare bedroom office. The decryption of the Vanguard Trust had been the master key, but a key is only useful if you know exactly how to turn the lock. I needed to ensure that when I walked into that law office, Gregory would not just lose his company. I needed to ensure he would lose his freedom. I spent the next 96 hours compiling the definitive forensic audit of his entire empire. I did not sleep in my bed. I took brief, restless naps on the floor of my office, surrounded by stacks of printed ledgers, highlighters, and legal pads. I went through every single fraudulent transaction I had uncovered during my time at the cheap motel. I documented the exact dates and routing numbers where Gregory had illegally siphoned capital away from the foundational assets my biological father had built. I traced the money laundering through the Delaware Holding Company and mapped the exact flow of cash into the Cayman Islands Shadow Corporation. But I did not stop there. I meticulously calculated the exact amount of federal tax evasion Gregory had committed over the last 30 years. I cross-referenced his inflated commercial property valuations against the actual dismal occupancy rates of his stalled high-rise projects. I built a comprehensive, undeniable timeline that proved he was running a massive corporate shell game to hide his impending bankruptcy. By Sunday evening, I had produced a 500-page forensic audit. It was a masterpiece of financial compliance bound in thick, black leather portfolios. It was not just a report, it was a loaded weapon. With the financial audit complete, I needed to solidify the legal execution of my corporate takeover. I picked up my phone and called Liam Pierce. He answered on the first ring, his voice calm and reassuring. I told him that the trap was officially set for Wednesday morning at Mr. Harrison's law firm. Liam understood exactly what needed to be done. We could not simply walk into the meeting and drop the documents on the table. Gregory was a master manipulator. If he saw the documents for the first time in front of his family, he would immediately claim they were forged, call his security team, and attempt to tie me up in frivolous litigation for years while he liquidated the remaining assets. We needed to bypass Gregory entirely and go straight to the legal authority binding him. Mr. Harrison was the primary estate lawyer for the real estate firm. More importantly, he was a sworn officer of the court. He was legally and ethically bound to uphold the law, regardless of who paid his hefty retainer. If Mr. Harrison knowingly facilitated a fraudulent stock transfer while in possession of verified proof that the true heir had assumed control, he would be instantly disbarred and potentially face federal conspiracy charges. I carefully packaged the verified commercial DNA results, showing my 0% match to Gregory. I printed the decrypted original Vanguard blind trust documents using a bright yellow highlighter on the dead man's switch clause that activated on my 34th birthday. Finally, I added a condensed 50-page executive summary of the forensic audit, detailing the exact criminal tax liabilities Gregory was currently hiding from the government. Liam used his own high-level corporate connections to secure a heavily bonded certified legal courier. We required a courier service that guaranteed direct hand-to-hand delivery, completely bypassing the law firm's standard mail sorting room. On Tuesday morning, exactly 24 hours before the scheduled meeting, the courier walked into the towering downtown law office. He demanded a direct signature from Mr. Harrison himself. I sat at my kitchen island, watching the tracking status on my secure laptop screen. At precisely 10:15 in the morning, the status updated to delivered. The digital receipt showed a scrawled signature belonging to the senior estate lawyer. The package was officially in his hands. I closed my laptop and took a deep breath. The explosive truth was no longer hidden in my apartment. It was sitting on the mahogany desk of the man Gregory trusted most. Mr. Harrison was currently reading the undeniable proof that his biggest client was a fraud, an embezzler, and a thief. He was realizing that the corporate empire did not belong to the man signing his checks. It belonged to the woman scheduled to walk into his conference room tomorrow at 10 o'clock. The legal snare was perfectly set, and there was absolutely no way Gregory could back out of it now. Tuesday evening descended over Chicago with a quiet, heavy stillness. The relentless rain from the previous weeks had finally cleared, leaving the city sky cold and startlingly clear. I stood by the large window of my living room, looking out at the distant glittering skyline. My apartment was impeccably clean. The massive stacks of financial ledgers and property deeds had been properly shredded and disposed of. The digital whiteboards on my secondary monitors had been wiped clean. The exhaustive labor of the past few weeks was completely finished. There was nothing left to analyze, nothing left to uncover, and nothing left to hide. For the first time in 34 years, my mind was entirely silent. The constant buzzing anxiety that had plagued my entire existence was gone. Growing up in Gregory and Linda's mansion, I had lived in a perpetual state of hypervigilance. I was always waiting for the next cruel comment, the next unreasonable demand, the next reminder that I was fundamentally flawed. I had spent decades trying to anticipate their moods, contorting myself into whatever shape I thought might finally earn their approval. I had endured Chelsea's relentless bullying, assuming it was simply the price of admission for being part of their family. But looking out at the city lights, I realized that the frightened, compliant girl who had sat at that steakhouse table was completely gone. She had been erased the moment I saw the 0% genetic match on my computer screen. In her place stood the rightful heir to the Pierce estate, a woman armed with undeniable truth and overwhelming corporate power. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, briefly illuminating the dark room. I walked over and picked it up. A new text message glowed brightly on the lock screen. It was from Chelsea. I did not need to open the message to feel the toxic, arrogant energy radiating from it. She was undoubtedly sitting in her luxury apartment, sipping expensive wine paid for by the very company she thought her father owned, feeling incredibly triumphant. She believed tomorrow was the day I would officially surrender. She believed I was walking into that law office to accept a pathetic $5,000 check because I was too weak and too poor to fight back. I swiped the screen and opened the text. Her message was short, brutal, and entirely predictable. I hope you actually bought a decent outfit for tomorrow with the credit cards Dad has not canceled yet, Chelsea wrote. It is going to be really fun watching you sign your rights away. You are a loser who finally knows her place. See you tomorrow, mistake. I stared at the glowing words. A month ago, a message like this would have sent me spiraling into a deep, painful depression. I would have agonized over my wardrobe, desperately trying to find something that would make me look respectable enough to avoid her mockery. I would have spent the entire night dreading the impending humiliation of the meeting, wondering how I could survive another round of their psychological warfare. Tonight, I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, chilling sense of calm. Chelsea was fiercely gloating from the deck of a sinking ship. She was boasting about her wedding, her status, and her unearned wealth, completely oblivious to the massive iceberg rapidly tearing through the hull beneath her feet. She had no idea that the money funding her $500,000 wedding was gone. She had no idea that her fiancé, the snobby politician, would drop her the second he realized her family was bankrupt. She was so consumed by her own vanity and malice that she could not see the executioner standing right in front of her. I did not type a reply. I did not block her number. I simply turned the screen off and set the phone face down on the counter. Silence was the ultimate power move. Let her believe she had won the night. Tomorrow, I was taking the entire kingdom. I walked into my bedroom and opened the closet door. I bypassed the casual clothes and the inexpensive blazers I usually wore to blend into the background. I reached into the very back and pulled out a heavy protective garment bag. I unzipped it carefully, revealing a stunning, immaculately tailored charcoal gray suit. I had purchased it years ago with my very first significant bonus check as a compliance auditor, but I had never actually worn it. Gregory had always insisted his female employees wear muted, unthreatening colors. He hated anything that projected too much authority. He wanted his subordinates to look exactly like what they were: subordinates. I carried the suit into the laundry room and set up my ironing board. I filled the iron with distilled water and plugged it in, waiting for the small orange light to indicate it was ready. I laid the charcoal trousers flat against the board and began to press them. The hot steam hissed loudly, filling the small room with the clean, crisp scent of heated fabric. I moved the iron with slow, deliberate precision, pressing perfect sharp creases into the legs. I hung the trousers up and moved on to the matching jacket, carefully smoothing the lapels and the tailored shoulders. This was not just a piece of clothing, it was my armor. Tomorrow, I was not walking into Mr. Harrison's office as Gregory's disgraced, evicted daughter. I was walking in as the majority shareholder and the absolute owner of Vanguard Holdings. I needed to look like the apex predator of the corporate sector. I needed to look like a woman who could effortlessly dismantle a 30-year fraud and not lose a single second of sleep over it. Once the suit was perfectly pressed and hanging on the back of my bedroom door, I laid out a crisp white silk shirt and a pair of polished black leather heels. I set my secure work laptop and the massive leather-bound binder containing the full 500-page forensic audit next to my handbag on the kitchen counter. Everything was prepared. Every variable had been accounted for. The trap was flawlessly set. I walked into the bathroom and washed my face, looking at my reflection in the mirror. I studied my hazel eyes, the slight downward tilt at the outer corners. They were Jonathan Pierce's eyes. They were the eyes of a brilliant engineer who had built a legacy from the ground up, only to have it stolen by a greedy, manipulative junior partner. I traced the strong line of my jaw. For my entire life, I had looked in the mirror and felt a deep, pervasive sense of wrongness, a feeling that I did not belong in my own skin. Tonight, I finally recognized the woman looking back at me. I was a Pierce. I was the rightful heir. I turned off the bathroom light and walked into my bedroom. I slipped between the cool, clean sheets of my bed. The apartment was completely silent, save for the distant, muffled sounds of the city traffic drifting up from the street below. I closed my eyes and let the profound, heavy peace wash over me. I did not toss and turn. I did not worry about what Gregory might say or what Linda might do. I knew exactly what was going to happen. The storm was coming, but I was no longer the one caught out in the rain. I was the one bringing the thunder. I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, completely ready for the sun to rise and rewrite my entire family history. The following Wednesday morning arrived with a crisp, clear blue sky over Chicago. I walked into the towering glass and steel skyscraper that housed Mr. Harrison's prestigious law firm. The massive building was a monument to wealth and corporate power, standing right in the heart of the financial district. I stepped into the polished chrome elevator and pressed the button for the 42nd floor. The high-speed ascent made my ears pop slightly, but my heart remained perfectly steady. I was not the terrified, evicted daughter anymore. I was a predator walking into a trap of my own flawless design. The elevator doors slid silently open, revealing a vast reception area decorated with dark mahogany wood and imported marble floors. The receptionist recognized me immediately. She offered a polite, practiced smile and escorted me down a long, quiet hallway lined with original abstract paintings. She opened the heavy double doors to the primary executive conference room. I thanked her and walked inside, choosing a seat positioned deliberately at the center of the long, polished wooden table. The room featured floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking, unobstructed panoramic view of the city skyline. The very buildings Gregory claimed to own stretched out below us. I placed my sleek black leather portfolio on the table in front of me and opened it. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the quiet stillness of the room wash over me. I had arrived 30 minutes early to establish my physical presence in the space. I wanted them to walk into a room where I was already completely anchored and prepared for battle. Exactly at 10 o'clock, the heavy mahogany doors swung open. Chelsea walked in first. Her voice echoed loudly in the quiet professional space as she complained to our mother about a floral vendor. She was wearing a bright red designer dress that screamed for attention. She held her left hand up constantly, gesturing with exaggerated movements just to ensure the massive diamond engagement ring caught the overhead lighting. Linda followed closely behind her, wrapped in a cream-colored cashmere coat and carrying a crocodile skin handbag. Linda looked incredibly smug. Her chin was tilted upward, projecting an aura of absolute untouchable superiority. She believed they had won. She believed I had spent the last week starving and desperate, ready to crawl back and accept their pathetic $5,000 payout. "Well, look who actually showed up," Chelsea sneered, spotting me at the table. She dropped her designer bag onto a leather chair and smirked. "I honestly thought you might just ghost us and run away to another city, Brooke. I am glad you came, though. Julian and I need to finalize the catering budget today, and your little signature is the last annoying roadblock holding up the funds." I did not look up from the file I was calmly reviewing. I slowly turned a page, my expression completely blank. Linda took the seat next to Chelsea, letting out a soft, condescending sigh. "Do not tease your sister, Chelsea. This is a difficult day for her. We should be gracious that she finally came to her senses. It takes a certain kind of maturity to admit when you are entirely out of options." She looked at me with a fake, sympathetic smile. "You are doing the right thing, Brooke. We can have a quiet, quick transaction today, and you can take your little check and start over somewhere else. You will feel much better once this is finished." Before I could formulate a response, Gregory strode confidently into the conference room. He was wearing his best power suit, a sharp, dark navy ensemble tailored to perfection. He radiated arrogant corporate energy. He walked straight to the head of the table, assuming his position as the patriarch and the undisputed ruler of the room. He unbuttoned his jacket and sat down, looking at me with pure, cold calculation. "I see you brought a pen this time," Gregory said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I hope you also brought a better attitude. I do not have time for any more of your theatrical water-spilling stunts today. I have 3 major contractor meetings this afternoon, and I need this minor housekeeping issue resolved immediately." I slowly closed my file and folded my hands neatly on the table. I looked Gregory directly in the eyes. "I brought exactly what I needed to bring," I replied softly. Gregory scoffed, pulling his gold watch from his sleeve to check the time. "Where is Harrison?" he demanded, looking toward the closed doors. "I pay his firm an astronomical retainer specifically, so I do not have to wait around in conference rooms. He should have had the quitclaim deed printed and ready for your signature the moment we walked through those doors. Time is money. Brooke and you are currently wasting mine." Chelsea leaned back in her chair, inspecting her manicure. "He is probably just printing the $5,000 check," she mocked. "Do not worry, Brooke, you will get your grocery money soon enough. Just try not to spend it all in one place." The silence in the room stretched out, becoming increasingly uncomfortable for them. I simply sat there, watching them perform their toxic familial rituals. Linda reached over and patted Chelsea's hand, whispering something about the wedding venue upgrades they could secure by tomorrow afternoon. They were already spending the money they thought my signature would release. They were planning lavish menus and extensive floral arrangements entirely oblivious to the catastrophic financial reality hovering right above their heads. Gregory tapped his fingers impatiently against the polished wood of the table. His foot bounced slightly under the table, revealing a subtle hidden current of nervous energy. He needed this liquidation to happen today. His aggressive creditors were undoubtedly breathing down his neck, and the carefully constructed illusion of his wealth was fracturing by the minute. I observed his slight physical tells with the clinical detachment of an auditor finding a discrepancy in a ledger. He was completely cornered, and he genuinely thought I was his only way out of a devastating bankruptcy. The sheer magnitude of his delusion was almost fascinating to witness in real time. He truly believed he held all the power in this room. 5 more minutes passed in tense silence. The heavy mahogany doors finally clicked and slowly pushed inward. Mr. Harrison walked into the conference room. He was a man in his late 50s, usually characterized by a ruddy, confident complexion and a booming, authoritative voice. Today, however, he looked completely different. He was visibly pale, his skin a sickly, chalky shade of gray. A thin sheen of nervous sweat glistened clearly across his forehead. He was not walking with his usual arrogant corporate stride. He moved stiffly, taking small, hesitant steps as if the floor beneath him might suddenly give way at any given moment. His eyes darted nervously between Gregory and me, fully processing the sheer gravity of the legal bomb he was currently holding in his hands. He knew that participating in this fraudulent transaction would end his career permanently, resulting in immediate disbarment and severe federal charges. Clutched tightly against his chest, gripped so hard his knuckles were entirely white, was the massive black leather binder I had sent him via the certified legal courier 24 hours earlier. It contained the 500-page forensic audit, the verified DNA test results, and the decrypted Vanguard blind trust documents. He had read everything. I could see the profound, absolute terror radiating from his wide eyes as he looked around the room. He knew exactly what Gregory had done, and he knew exactly who I really was. He realized his biggest client was a monumental fraud who had stolen an entire empire from a deceased partner. The crushing weight of 30 years of deception pressed heavily down upon the senior attorney's shoulders, rendering him completely speechless for several long, agonizing seconds. Gregory stood up immediately, relieved by the lawyer's arrival. Finally, Gregory barked, his voice loud and demanding. "Get the waiver out, Harrison, so we can get it signed and cut this dead weight loose. I want the restricted stock released for sale by the end of the business day. Do not keep me waiting any longer. We have a wedding to pay for, and I am tired of looking at her face." Gregory extended his right hand across the wide mahogany table, offering a firm, confident handshake to his longtime estate lawyer. Mr. Harrison stopped walking. He stood near the edge of the table, staring at Gregory's outstretched hand, as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. He did not reach out. He did not smile. He simply stood there, trembling slightly, breathing heavily, and clutching my heavy black binder tightly against his chest, refusing to shake Gregory's hand. Gregory let his outstretched hand fall slowly back to his side. The arrogant, self-assured expression on his face fractured, replaced by a dark, dangerous confusion. He was a man accustomed to absolute obedience, and his own estate lawyer was currently looking at him with sheer, undisguised horror. "What is wrong with you, Harrison?" Gregory demanded, his voice echoing sharply off the glass walls of the conference room. "Put that binder down and get the quitclaim deed out right now. I do not have time for whatever game you are playing. We are executing the stock sale today." Mr. Harrison swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing above his tight collar. He took a hesitant step away from Gregory and moved toward the opposite end of the long mahogany table. When he finally spoke, his booming, authoritative courtroom voice was completely gone. It was replaced by a thin, trembling rasp. "I cannot authorize the sale of those restricted shares, Gregory," Mr. Harrison said. "In fact, I cannot authorize any transactions on behalf of this firm or its holding companies effective immediately. You no longer possess the legal authority to order the liquidation of any corporate assets." Gregory stared at the lawyer as if the older man had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Have you lost your mind? I am the chief executive officer. I am the sole owner of this entire enterprise. No, you are not, I said quietly from my seat at the center of the table. You never were. Gregory snapped his head toward me, his eyes blazing with fury. Keep your mouth shut, Brooke. This has nothing to do with you. Mr. Harrison placed the thick black binder onto the polished wood. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely open the heavy leather cover. He flipped past the first few pages and pulled out a crisp, officially notarized document featuring a bright yellow highlight. It has everything to do with her, Mr. Harrison said, his voice gaining a slight desperate strength. Gregory, 24 hours ago I received certified, legally verified documentation regarding the true ownership structure of your firm. I was provided with an authenticated commercial DNA test that definitively proves you are not Brooke's biological father. I was also provided with the original decrypted legal framework for the Vanguard Blind Trust. The color completely drained from Gregory's face. The name of the trust hit him with the force of a physical blow. He staggered backward, slightly bumping into the edge of his leather chair. The Vanguard Trust was established 33 years ago by Jonathan Pierce. Mr. Harrison continued reading directly from the highlighted text. It contains the foundational patents and 51% controlling shares of the entire real estate empire. The trust stipulates that Gregory and Linda were merely appointed as temporary rogue trustees. Furthermore, the document contains a strict execution clause. Upon the verified biological heir reaching their 34th birthday, the trust automatically matures and dissolves. Mr. Harrison looked up from the paper, his terrified gaze shifting between Gregory and me. Brooke is the verified biological daughter of Jonathan Pierce. She turned 34 last week. Therefore, complete controlling ownership of the entire empire, including all associated liquid assets and subsidiary properties, reverted instantly and irrevocably to her. She is the majority shareholder. You are effectively her employee, Gregory, and you have absolutely no authority to sell her stock. The absolute silence that followed was deafening. The illusion of Gregory's untouchable supremacy completely shattered into a million jagged pieces. He stood frozen, his mind frantically trying to process the catastrophic reality that his 30-year theft had just been undone by the very girl he had spent his life abusing. Then the meltdown began. "That is a lie!" Gregory roared, his voice tearing through the quiet room. He slammed both of his heavy fists down onto the mahogany table with such extreme violence that the crystal water glasses rattled dangerously. "It is a forged, fabricated lie. Jonathan gave me this company. Linda signed everything over to me. I built this empire with my own 2 hands. I will destroy you for bringing this forged garbage into my office, Harrison. I will have you disbarred by Friday morning." Mr. Harrison took another quick step back, terrified but resolute. "The documents are ironclad, Gregory. I had them independently verified by 3 different estate law specialists last night. The DNA match is legally binding. The trust is impenetrable. If I attempt to execute your stock sale today, I will be committing federal fraud. The company belongs to Brooke. It is over." At the other end of the table, Linda let out a sharp, dramatic gasp. She pressed her hands against her cheeks, her eyes darting frantically around the room. She realized instantly that the luxurious, wealthy lifestyle she had protected at all costs was evaporating right before her eyes. The private jets, the country club memberships, and the sprawling suburban mansions were no longer hers. They belonged to the daughter she had treated like a shameful burden. Linda immediately pivoted, utilizing the only weapon she had left, her maternal facade. She burst into theatrical, heaving tears. She rushed around the edge of the large table and threw herself toward my chair, reaching out with shaking, desperate hands. "Brooke, my precious firstborn!" Linda cried, her voice dripping with manufactured, desperate affection. "Oh, my sweet girl, I always knew your father was watching over you. I always wanted to tell you the truth, but Gregory forced me to keep the secret. He threatened to leave us destitute if I ever breathed a word about Jonathan. You have to believe me, sweetheart. I love you so much. We can run the company together, just mother and daughter, the way it was always meant to be." I sat perfectly still, refusing to let her manicured fingers touch my tailored charcoal suit. I looked at the woman who had happily watched me be humiliated at a steakhouse just weeks prior. "Save your tears, Linda," I said, my tone as cold and hard as a glacial winter. "I heard the recording of you and Chelsea planning to steal my inheritance. I know exactly who you are, and you will not see a single dime of my money." Across the room, the full weight of the situation finally crashed down upon Chelsea. She had been staring blankly at the legal documents, her mind struggling to comprehend the financial jargon. But when Linda started begging for money, the reality finally clicked into place. The restricted stock was not going to be sold. The massive influx of cash was not coming. "My wedding!" Chelsea shrieked, her voice high-pitched and hysterical. She looked at Gregory with wide, panicked eyes. "Dad, what about my wedding? Julian's family is expecting a $500,000 event. The caterers need their deposit by noon today. If we do not pay them, Julian will cancel the engagement. He will leave me. You promised me that money." Gregory ignored her, staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his expensive navy suit. Chelsea turned her frantic, venomous gaze toward me. "You did this on purpose!" she screamed, her face twisting into an ugly, furious scowl. "You planned this just to ruin my life because you are jealous. You are a miserable, ugly, unwanted mistake, and I am not going to let you steal my wedding." Chelsea lunged across the wide conference room, her hands outstretched, aiming directly for my face. She was completely unhinged, driven by the sheer terror of losing her wealthy politician fiancé and her elite social standing. Before she could even close the distance, the heavy mahogany doors flew open. Liam Pierce stepped into the room, flanked immediately by two massive, highly trained private security contractors we had retained for exactly this scenario. The guards moved with swift, brutal efficiency. They intercepted Chelsea mid-lunge, grabbing her arms and physically restraining her. She thrashed wildly, kicking her expensive heels against the floor and screaming obscenities, but the guards held her firmly in place, completely neutralizing the threat. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my tailored jacket. The room was a chaotic symphony of Chelsea's screaming, Linda's fake sobbing, and Gregory's heavy, furious breathing. I looked at the three of them, feeling a profound, absolute sense of vindication. I reached down to the floor beside my chair and lifted my heavy black leather tote bag. I pulled out the secondary, much thicker binder. It was the 500-page forensic audit I had meticulously compiled in my secure apartment. I dropped the heavy binder onto the center of the mahogany table. The loud, heavy thud echoed through the room, cutting through the noise and silencing them instantly. "Oh, I am not just taking my company back," I said, looking directly into Gregory's terrified eyes. "As the new majority shareholder, I have personally audited the last 30 years of your private filings, your offshore shell companies, and your Delaware holding accounts. You do not just have zero assets, Gregory. You owe the Internal Revenue Service $12 million in back taxes." The silence that followed my declaration was entirely different from the shock of the Vanguard Trust reveal. This was the heavy, suffocating silence of a man realizing he was not just losing his company, but his actual freedom. Gregory stared at the thick secondary binder I had just dropped onto the mahogany table. His chest heaved as he struggled to draw breath. The $12 million figure hung in the air like a physical weight, pressing down on the entire room. He knew exactly what was in those pages. He knew I had found the Cayman Islands accounts and the Delaware shell corporations. But his massive ego simply refused to accept defeat. "That is an absolute lie!" Gregory roared, his voice echoing violently against the glass walls of the conference room. He slammed both of his heavy fists down onto the table with such terrifying force that the crystal water glasses rattled and tipped, spilling cold water across the polished wood. "You fabricated this entire audit just to extort me. I will have you arrested for corporate espionage before you even make it to the lobby." I remained perfectly seated, looking at him with absolute pity. "I did not need to bypass your modern firewalls," Gregory the Fry explained, keeping my voice incredibly calm. "You left a dozen backdoor access points completely wide open in your legacy systems. I simply walked through the front door of your outdated network and downloaded every single fraudulent ledger you have touched since 1990. Mr. Harrison has already reviewed the executive summary. It is undeniable. Gregory whipped his head toward his estate lawyer, his face a mottled, dangerous shade of purple. Harrison, you cannot possibly believe this forged garbage, Gregory demanded, spit flying from his lips. You represent me. You are going to throw this binder in the shredder right now. Mr. Harrison took another step backward, pressing his back firmly against the heavy wooden door of the conference room. He looked at Gregory with pure, undisguised disgust. I represent the legal entity of Vanguard Holdings. Mr. Harrison corrected his voice, shaking but resolute. For 30 years, I believed you were the rightful owner of that entity. Now that I have verified the biological heir, my fiduciary duty transfers immediately to Brooke. And based on the preliminary tax evasion evidence I reviewed this morning, my first act as her corporate counsel will be advising her to hand this binder directly over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. At the other end of the long table, Linda finally grasped the sheer magnitude of the situation. The revelation about the trust had stripped away her mansions and her country club memberships, but the revelation about the $12 million tax debt meant something far worse. It meant federal indictments, asset seizures, and total public ruin. She instantly realized that staying loyal to Gregory meant going down with his sinking ship. She immediately pivoted, deploying the only weapon she had left in her arsenal: her maternal facade. Linda burst into loud theatrical tears, burying her face in her hands before rushing around the edge of the conference table. She threw herself toward my chair, dropping to her knees on the expensive imported rug. She reached out with shaking, desperate hands, trying to grasp the sleeve of my tailored charcoal suit. Brooke, my precious firstborn. Linda cried, her voice dripping with a manufactured, desperate affection that turned my stomach. Oh, my sweet, beautiful girl. I always knew your father was watching over you. I wanted to tell you the truth for so many years, but Gregory forced me to keep his terrible secrets. He threatened to leave us completely destitute if I ever breathed a single word about Jonathan. You have to believe me, sweetheart. We can run this company together, just mother and daughter, exactly the way it was always meant to be. We do not need him. I sat perfectly still, pulling my arm away before her manicured fingers could touch my jacket. I looked down at the woman who had happily watched me be humiliated at a steakhouse just a few weeks prior. I looked at the woman who had called my biological father a penniless loser. Save your tears, Linda, I said, my tone as cold and hard as a glacial winter. I heard the audio recording of you and Chelsea planning to steal my trust fund. I know exactly who you are, and I know exactly what you think of me. You are a willing accomplice who sold her own child for a taste of luxury. You will not see a single dime of my money, and you will not have a seat at my table. Across the room, the full weight of the catastrophe finally crashed down upon Chelsea. She had been staring blankly at the complex legal documents, her mind failing to comprehend the dense financial jargon. But when Linda started begging for money and throwing Gregory under the bus, the reality finally clicked into place for the golden child. The restricted company stock was not going to be sold. The massive influx of cash was not coming to save them. My wedding! Chelsea shrieked, her voice high-pitched and incredibly hysterical. She looked at Gregory with wide, panicked eyes, clutching her own face. Dad, what about my wedding? Julian's family is expecting a $500,000 luxury event. The caterers need their final deposit by noon today. The venue needs their final payment tomorrow. If we do not pay them, Julian will cancel the engagement. His family will not marry into a bankrupt scandal. He will leave me. You promised me that money. You said it was guaranteed. Gregory completely ignored her, his chest heaving as he stared at the financial audit sitting on the table. He was entirely consumed by his own impending doom, leaving Chelsea to face her social ruin completely alone. Chelsea turned her frantic, venomous gaze toward me, her beautiful features twisted into an ugly, furious scowl. You did this on purpose, she screamed, her voice cracking with raw desperation. You planned this just to ruin my life because you have always been jealous of me. You are a miserable, ugly, unwanted mistake, and I am not going to let you steal my wedding. Chelsea lunged across the wide conference room, her hands outstretched like claws aiming directly for my face. She was completely unhinged, driven by the sheer terror of losing her wealthy politician fiancé and her elite social standing. She did not care about the tax fraud or the stolen empire. She only cared that her perfect funded reality had been ripped away. Before she could even close the distance, the heavy mahogany doors behind me flew open. Liam Pierce stepped into the room, flanked immediately by two massive, highly trained private security contractors we had retained for exactly this scenario. The guards moved with swift, brutal efficiency. They intercepted Chelsea mid-lunge, grabbing her arms and physically restraining her before she could touch me. She thrashed wildly, kicking her expensive heels against the polished floor and screaming obscenities, but the guards held her firmly in place, completely neutralizing the threat. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my tailored jacket. I looked at the three of them, feeling a profound, absolute sense of vindication wash through my entire body. I picked up my black tote bag and walked out the door. The heavy silence that followed my declaration was absolute. Gregory did not yell. He did not slam his fists against the mahogany table again. The fight completely drained out of his body in a single, terrifying instant. He slumped backward into his expensive leather chair, his face entirely devoid of color. The arrogant, untouchable real estate tycoon was gone, replaced by a hollow, aging man who had just realized his entire life was a fabricated illusion. He stared at the thick black binder sitting in the center of the table, his eyes wide and vacant. He knew I possessed the exact routing numbers. He knew I had traced the Cayman Islands shadow accounts. There was no legal loophole, no expensive defense attorney, and no corporate manipulation that could save him from the sheer crushing weight of federal tax fraud. Mr. Harrison moved slowly toward the table, keeping a very safe distance from Gregory. He reached out with trembling hands and pulled the massive forensic audit toward his chest. He looked at me, a profound mixture of professional awe and deep personal terror reflecting in his eyes. He nodded once, a silent, solemn acknowledgement of the transfer of power. As the new legal counsel for Vanguard Holdings, he was now ethically bound to protect the company from the criminal liabilities Gregory had created. I did not wait for Linda to start begging again. I did not wait for Chelsea to stop struggling against the private security contractors. I turned my back on the wreckage of my former family and walked out of the executive conference room. My footsteps echoed sharply against the imported marble floors of the reception area. Liam Pierce followed closely behind me, his presence a steady grounding force. We stepped into the polished chrome elevator, and the heavy doors slid shut, cutting off the chaotic sounds of Chelsea's frantic screaming. The descent down the towering skyscraper felt entirely different than the ride up. The heavy, suffocating anxiety that had plagued my entire adult life was gone. I felt incredibly light, as if a massive, suffocating chain had finally been severed from my neck. By the time we walked out of the glass building and into the crisp Chicago air, the immediate fallout had already begun. I had not just relied on Mr. Harrison to handle the legal transition. I had meticulously planned every single angle of this corporate execution. Exactly 15 minutes prior to the meeting, I had scheduled an automated, highly encrypted email to be delivered directly to the campaign manager of Julian Montgomery. Julian was the snobby elite politician who was engaged to Chelsea. He was a man who valued pristine public optics above absolutely everything else. He was marrying into our family specifically for Gregory's corporate funding and political connections. The automated email contained a heavily redacted, yet undeniable summary of Gregory's impending federal indictment. It explicitly detailed the $12 million tax debt and outlined the immediate freezing of all corporate assets. It clearly stated that the $500,000 wedding was entirely unfunded and that Gregory was days away from a highly publicized federal arrest. As Liam and I walked toward his waiting car, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and watched the notifications flood my screen. It was not Gregory or Linda. It was a chaotic string of desperate messages from Chelsea. Julian's campaign manager had obviously read the email and immediately contacted him. Julian, terrified of being politically associated with a massive federal embezzlement scandal, had acted with ruthless, immediate self-preservation. He had called Chelsea right there in the law firm lobby. He did not ask for an explanation. He did not offer any comfort. He abruptly and permanently canceled the engagement over a 60-second phone call, explicitly telling her to never contact him or his family again. Chelsea was left completely abandoned in the lobby of Mr. Harrison's firm, sobbing hysterically as her entire funded reality collapsed around her. But the nightmare was only just beginning for her. Without Gregory's corporate accounts to act as a financial shield, the aggressive vendors for her extravagant wedding began demanding their overdue payments. The exclusive country club called her cell phone to inform her that her initial deposit check had bounced. The custom couture designer canceled her gown fitting. The imported floral arrangers voided her contract. Within 3 hours of the conference room meeting, Chelsea's perfect, carefully curated lifestyle was completely annihilated. She was publicly humiliated, dumped by her high-profile fiancé, and buried under a mountain of canceled vendor contracts she could not afford to pay. She had spent her entire life mocking me for my inexpensive blazers and my quiet apartment, entirely oblivious to the fact that she owned absolutely nothing. Everything she had was a borrowed illusion, and I had just turned the lights out. The rapid disintegration of their social standing was only the first phase of my retribution. The second phase required a much more clinical legal approach. Over the next 48 hours, I worked tirelessly alongside Liam and Mr. Harrison to formally stabilize the internal structure of Vanguard Holdings. We initiated a total lockdown of the corporate accounts, freezing Gregory's access to every single company credit card and subsidiary ledger. But my most satisfying executive action involved the sprawling suburban mansion my parents had lived in for 3 decades. Gregory had always boasted about his massive estate, using it to intimidate rivals and project an aura of generational wealth. However, during my extensive forensic audit, I discovered a fatal flaw in his asset management. To avoid personal property taxes, Gregory had placed the deed to the suburban mansion directly under the ownership umbrella of a Vanguard Holdings subsidiary company. He treated the home as a corporate asset, using it as a massive tax write-off. Because the mansion was legally owned by the company, and because I was now the verified majority shareholder and acting chief executive officer, I had the absolute legal authority to manage that asset. Gregory and Linda were no longer employees or recognized executives. They were unauthorized occupants living in company-subsidized housing. I drafted a formal, legally binding eviction notice. I did not give them 30 days. Because Gregory was actively under investigation for corporate embezzlement, Mr. Harrison utilized an emergency asset protection clause. They were given exactly 72 hours to vacate the premises entirely. On a cold, overcast Friday morning, I drove out to the affluent suburban neighborhood. I did not go alone. I arrived with Liam, a team of private corporate security guards, and 2 local county sheriffs to oversee the eviction process. We parked our vehicles at the end of the long, meticulously manicured driveway. The scene that unfolded was a masterpiece of poetic justice. The heavy wrought iron gates of the estate were locked wide open. Linda and Gregory were actively carrying their designer luggage out of the grand mahogany front doors. They had no moving trucks, no staff, and no assistants. Their personal bank accounts had been frozen pending the federal tax investigation, leaving them with absolutely no way to hire professional movers. Linda was wearing a long, expensive cashmere coat, her face pale and heavily streaked with ruined makeup. She struggled to drag a massive, oversized leather suitcase down the brick pathway. She looked absolutely exhausted, her former arrogant posture completely broken. Gregory walked silently behind her, carrying 2 heavy duffel bags. He looked small, defeated, and entirely stripped of his toxic corporate power. Chelsea was nowhere to be seen, likely hiding in whatever cheap hotel room she had managed to secure before her credit cards were declined. The spectacle did not go unnoticed. The affluent, nosy neighbors who had always attended Linda's lavish garden parties and country club dinners were now standing at the edges of their own sprawling driveways. They watched in hushed, gossiping clusters as the mighty Gregory and Linda were unceremoniously thrown out of their home. I saw several neighbors holding up their smartphones, capturing the humiliating eviction on video. Within hours, the footage would be circulating through their elite social circles, completely destroying whatever fragile remnants of their reputations still existed. I stood calmly by my car, watching them pack their bags into a heavily depreciated sedan they had clearly borrowed. Gregory paused before getting into the driver's seat. He looked across the driveway, his defeated eyes meeting mine. For a brief, fleeting moment, I saw the profound weight of his regret. Not regret for stealing the company, but regret for underestimating the quiet, observant girl he had abused for 34 years. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply looked at him with the cold, absolute detachment of a successful auditor closing a file. As they drove away from the estate, a fleet of dark, unmarked government vehicles turned onto the private road. The federal agents had arrived. Mr. Harrison had officially submitted the forensic audit to the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation earlier that morning. The agents were there to secure the property and begin their extensive criminal investigation into Gregory's massive tax evasion and corporate fraud. He was going to face a very lengthy federal indictment, and there was absolutely no expensive lawyer on earth who could save him from the undeniable paper trail I had meticulously compiled. With the toxic remnants of my past finally removed, I spent the next 6 months completely rebuilding the empire my biological father had founded. It was incredibly grueling, demanding work, but it was profoundly rewarding. I systematically dismantled the illegal Cayman Islands shell corporations, repatriated the stolen funds, and paid off the legitimate creditors. I halted the failing, ego-driven commercial high-rise projects Gregory had started, redirecting the company's massive capital back toward the foundational, innovative structural engineering patents Jonathan Pierce had originally created. Liam proved to be an invaluable ally and a true family member. He helped me navigate the complex waters of corporate leadership, introducing me to the loyal executives and partners who had always suspected Gregory's corruption but lacked the power to expose him. Slowly, Vanguard Holdings transformed from a toxic, fraud-ridden shell game into a thriving, ethical powerhouse. Exactly 1 year after that humiliating birthday dinner, I found myself walking through the rainy, bustling streets of downtown Chicago. The evening air was crisp and cool, carrying the familiar scent of wet asphalt and city exhaust. I was wearing the exact same tailored charcoal gray suit I had worn to the law office. I walked with my head held high, my posture projecting the quiet, unshakable confidence of a woman who had fought for her own existence and won. I arrived at the heavy wooden doors of the same high-end Michelin-starred steakhouse where Chelsea had handed me the DNA testing kit. I stepped inside, the warm golden glow of the crystal chandeliers washing over me. The hostess recognized me immediately, greeting me with deep, profound respect. She escorted me past the crowded main dining room and led me toward the private, secluded back room. I walked through the doors and took a slow, deep breath. The room was no longer filled with toxic, superficial socialites or abusive parents pretending to be a perfect family. The long mahogany table was surrounded by the people who truly mattered. Liam sat near the center, smiling warmly as I entered. My business partner from the compliance consultancy, the loyal friends who had supported me when I was living in a cheap, dingy motel, and the new dedicated executive board of Vanguard Holdings were all gathered together. They were talking, laughing genuinely, and sharing stories in an atmosphere completely devoid of malice or conditional love. I walked to the very head of the long table. The seat that Gregory had always occupied was now mine. I sat down, feeling the smooth, cool leather beneath my hands. The entire room naturally quieted down, turning their attention toward me, with absolute, unwavering respect. A waiter appeared silently at my shoulder, pouring a generous measure of vintage champagne into my crystal flute. I picked up the delicate glass, the sparkling liquid catching the ambient light of the room. I looked around at the faces of my chosen family, my true bloodline, and the incredible supportive network I had built from the ashes of my past. I thought about the quiet, brilliant structural engineer who had loved me enough to build a massive, impenetrable legal fortress to protect my future. I thought about the 34 years I had spent feeling like a broken, unwanted mistake. And I thought about the profound, beautiful justice of taking back everything that had been stolen from me. I raised my crystal glass high into the warm golden light. To Jonathan Pierce, I said, my voice strong, clear, and ringing with absolute victory. And to the undeniable, terrifying power of reading the fine print. The entire table raised their glasses in unison, their voices echoing my toast with genuine, heartfelt enthusiasm. The clinking of the crystal rang out like a bright, triumphant bell. I took a slow sip of the expensive champagne, letting the crisp, sweet taste linger on my tongue. I looked out through the large windows of the private dining room, watching the glittering, towering skyline of the city my father had helped build. The mistake of the family was now the undisputed master of the empire, and as the evening carried on with warm laughter and true connection, I knew with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I was always meant to be.